Chapter 949. Just as Zhang Yan's avatar was about to enter the light screen, he felt a gentle force pushing him out. He was surprised. He checked for a moment and realized that someone had set up a barrier. If an outsider's magic power was slightly stronger, it would be hard for them to enter. With his cultivation, it wasn't difficult for him to use his mana to forcefully disperse it. It's just that there were secret manuals of techniques he wanted to retrieve stored here, as well as quite a number of pill jades. If he used too much force and destroyed some of the arrangements, it wouldn't be good. With a thought, he stretched out his hand and took back a thread of essence chi from the clone. This clone was originally maintained at the second stage of strength-changing realm, which was equivalent to a Xian light realm cultivator. Now that he used it, his cultivation dropped and he could only be compared to a light chi realm cultivator. However, even so, he still couldn't do it. There seemed to be another layer of obstruction. He thought for a moment and thought to himself, could it be because of the soul? Thinking about it, it was possible. A grotto heaven was like their backyard to a divinity realm cultivator. Unless they were forcefully barged in, they wouldn't allow outsiders to peek in. Others might find it difficult to deal with it, or they might slowly resolve it. However, it was easy for him to deal with it. He extended a finger and hid a wisp of his spirit in the doppelganger, no longer actively controlling it like before. It was just like when he visited the Donglai continent. However, it was different from back then. Now that his cultivation was profound, he could see every single action of his avatar. If necessary, he could even replace it. After doing this, he tried again. As expected, there were no more obstructions in front of him. With a chuckle, Zhang Xian waved his sleeve, and his clone floated into the small world. After the clone entered, it was in a daze. When it woke up and could see again, it realized that it had landed beside a river. He discovered that he had landed on the bank of a river. The surface of the river was very wide, and the waves were surging. The river flowed quickly and the terrain on both sides was uneven. It was vast. When it raised its head, it saw the blue sky. When it looked up, it saw the sun and moon. Further away, there seemed to be countless stars. Zhang Yan sat outside and saw this through the clone's eyes. He couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. The situation here was as good as being in another world. It didn't look like an ordinary cave, but more like a small world. When the cultivators of the grotto heaven entered the second realm, their cultivation was profound, and they had sufficient mana. They could try to open up a grotto heaven as a place to gather spiritual vigor and protect themselves. If he was not a match for someone in a fight, he could hide in there temporarily. As long as the spiritual opportunity in the grotto heaven was endless, he would be fine. However, there was a flaw. Opening the grotto heaven required a massive amount of spiritual opportunity, and if it was left unattended for a long time. If he absorbed too much spiritual vigor, it would definitely collapse and dissipate. If there was a chance in the future, he would need to expend a lot of effort to reopen it. However, a small world was different. Those who could open up a small world had to be at least a powerful cultivator who had ascended to the immortal ascension realm. They could transfer the spiritual energy of the mountains and rivers of the outside world into the small world. For example, the original residence of the Duqin sect, the Xian Lu continent, had been established by the joint efforts of several cultivators from beyond the heavens. They had also extracted earth qi and placed it inside. It also left behind living beings to multiply and multiply. It could truly be said to be a world of its own. Zhang Yan had been to a few grotto heavens created by his peers. Most of them were empty, with only a few constructed mountains and rivers. This was Sun Junren, who loved to enjoy life the most. Other than a misty and hazy lake, there was nothing else. It was not that they did not want to build it, but their cultivation was not enough. Doing such things would only be a waste of spiritual opportunity. However, if there was a powerful talisman supporting the grotto heaven, then it would be a different story. Zhang Yan knew that Yan Changsheng had already exhausted his vitality and qi. His Dan Yu also said that he would not move. Logically speaking, he would not have any energy left to make other arrangements in the grotto heaven. Therefore, he guessed that there might be some spiritual treasure that could suppress the grotto heaven. He became interested and paid more attention. After the split body stood still by the river, he looked around. In his memory, he was a disciple of the Qinsang, under the Zhaoyu sect. He came here under the orders of his master to look for a book of martial arts and some external items for cultivation. He sensed for a long time at the same spot. He realized that heaven and earth were filled with spiritual opportunity. There were a few directions that he sensed were especially strong. He decided to go to those places to take a look. He inhaled and a clear qi filled his body. He then soared into the sky and floated along the river. After traveling for an hour, he saw that there were houses that were built on both sides of the river. Zhang Yan saw it and his eyes flashed. This meant that there were living people living in this grotto heaven. However, in this grotto heaven, one more person to cultivate meant one more spiritual opportunity. If it was not a disciple, it would not be done so. However, looking at the situation, it was not Yan Changxing's disciple. Just as he was thinking, the split body traveled another 10 miles. He heard a faint singing coming from the front. The music was loud and it was high-spirited. He gazed into the distance and saw a lone boat drifting with the waves on the long river. A robust man with a curly beard stood on the boat. He was tall and broad, had a sword at his waist, and held a wine gourd in his hand. He sang as he drank, and he seemed extremely heroic. As he got closer, the man saw him floating over. He was surprised and said loudly, "I'm so lucky to be able to meet a celestial today." He raised the wine gourd in his hand and patted it. He said, "There's good wine here. It's not as good as celestial brew, but it's strong enough. If you don't mind, why don't you come and drink with me?" Dragon Lake Great Marsh, Carefree Ripple Island. This place was outside of the mystical Water True Palace. It was vast and was usually the place where the disciples of the palace master gathered. The current palace master, Qi Yuntian, only took in Zhou Xian as his disciple in name. Hence, this place became the place where he usually cultivated. Today, Zhou Xian held a banquet on the island. The person he invited was not a cultivator of the same generation, but a Taoist boy who was on duty in the floating palace. This Taoist boy's Taoist name was Wan Ming. Although he was on duty in the Heaven Palace, he did not have much cultivation. Usually, he could only walk in the spiritual eye by relying on talismans. He knew that the next sect master would be Qi Yuntian if there were no accidents. Even if Zhou Xian was his disciple in name, he would be the future sect master's disciple. Today, he saw that the Taoist boy was unusually polite to him as if he was a distinguished guest. He was flattered. Luckily, he did not lose his mind. He knew that there must be something going on. After a few cups of wine, he asked carefully, "Jinren, why are you calling me? Do you have any orders?" Zhou Xian laughed and said, "I won't hide it from you. I want to inquire about something. Half a month ago, after Hall Master Duzhen returned, were there 2 Jinren accompanying him?" Hearing this, Wan Ming's hands trembled. The Heaven Palace deacon had repeatedly warned them not to tell anyone about the 2 of them. He groaned in his heart. If he knew it was about this, he would not have come. He could only say, "This. I don't know much about this. Why don't I go back and inquire about it?" After saying that, he hurriedly got up as if he was going to escape. Zhou Xian sat still. He gently waved his hand and a manna suddenly came down and pressed on Wan Ming's shoulder. He said with a faint smile, "Little Taoist Wan Ming, why do you have to be like this? I don't think it's something too important. How could you not know?" Wan Ming scolded in his heart, "If it's not something important, is it worth it for you to treat me like this?" On the surface, he put on a pitiful expression and said, "It's not that I don't want to give face to Jinren Zhou. In fact, the deacon Jinren has taken care of me. Whoever dares to leak this information will be severely punished. Please don't make things difficult for me." Zhou Xian smiled and let go of his hand. He said slowly, "Even if you don't say it, I know. That is Lu Junyang, Jinren Lu, who is under Jinren Yan. The other person is also from the same sect. Am I right? Wan Ming opened his mouth and said in a daze, since Jinren Zhou knows, why do you need to ask me? At this time, Zhou Xian finally revealed his purpose. He said with a smile, I won't hide it from you. I admire these two and want to get to know them. It's just that I don't know where they are staying, so I came to ask. I don't think you can hide this from me, right? As he spoke, he took out a Taoist book from his sleeve and a white jade porcelain bottle. He placed them on the table and said, in this book, there is a basic cultivation method and a few small techniques. In the bottle, there are some pills to replenish qi and strengthen the body. They are not good things and are useless to me. How about I give them to you? Wan Ming stole a glance. He knew that the other party said it was not good things, but if he listened to it the other way around, it must be good. He unconsciously swallowed his saliva and was a little tempted. When he was on duty in the floating palace, all he saw were cultivators with profound cultivation. When they walked around, they were accompanied by clouds and rosy clouds. It was such a glorious and carefree life. He also hoped that one day, he would be able to fly in the sky and travel the earth, living a happy life like an immortal. However, for children like him, other than those who were lucky enough to be taken in as disciples by the grotto heavens in the sect, most of them would be sent to manage the 9 courtyards when they grew older. And if they missed the age, even if they focused on Tao, they wouldn't be able to learn any proper skills. However, with this cultivation method in front of him, he might be able to step onto the path of Tao. However, he was still a little hesitant, but he still couldn't bear to part with the 2 items. After struggling for a while, he asked hesitantly, is Jinren only here for this? Zhou Xian laughed and said, other than this, what else can I do? Wan Ming gritted his teeth and cupped his hands, it's fine if you want me to say it, but I have a request. Zhou Xian said, that's easy. Little Taoist, please say it. Wan Ming said, if I say it this time, I'll be in trouble. I wonder if Jinren can allow me to serve you when I leave the celestial palace in the future. Zhou Xian didn't answer immediately. His eyelids were lowered as if he was thinking. Wan Ming was nervous. This was a chance to reach the heavens in one step. If he succeeded, he would have the chance to become a disciple of the future sect master. He couldn't help but stare at it. Now, he was the one who was afraid that Zhou Xian wouldn't agree. Zhou Xian thought for a while and sighed, all right. If I don't do this, I'm afraid that little Taoist won't be at ease. I'll agree to it. Wan Ming was overjoyed. He immediately pushed the table aside and shouted, disciple greets Jinren. However, Zhou Xian waved his hand and used mana to stop him from bowing. He only said, wait. Wan Ming understood. He took a few steps forward and said in a low voice, Jinren, the 2 distinguished guests didn't go anywhere else. They went to Farewell Peak. Zhou Xian was stunned. He knew about Farewell Peak. It was where the little cold world was located. No wonder he couldn't find out anything about it. He immediately frowned. Could it be that he had guessed wrongly? Did the sect find these 2 people not to deliberately train them, but to imprison them? Chapter 950. Zhang Yan's doppelganger heard the call from the man on the boat and landed on the boat. He didn't stand on ceremony and took a sip from the wine gourd. He commented, it's really not a good wine. There are even some secret medicines added into it. It's not something ordinary people can drink. The man smiled, immortal is right, my wine is strong, it's like poison to normal people. 1 sip will cause them to bleed from their 7 orifices, but if they know the way of luck, they won't have to fear it. The way of luck. The clone looked at him, you know the way of cultivation? The man laughed, how can I compare to you immortals? My way of luck was taught by the Qi Jin instructor in the county, it's just a normal method. Zhang Yan's clone asked a few more questions, only to find out that this was under the rule of the Yan dynasty, there were no demons, but bandits. It was just that the imperial court was powerless to control the counties after the princes fought for the throne 100 years ago. Thus, when the local tyrants became powerful, there would be a position of instructor, used in name to quell the bandits, command the troops, and fight against the imperial court. The person with the highest authority in the county would have a scarf on his head, hence he was called the Qi Jin instructor. Zhang Yan listened to the conversation between the two of them from the outside and was also amazed. Looking at this place, it seemed to be a country of its own. He immediately had a guess. Yan Changshan clearly did not treat this place as a place of cultivation. Otherwise, he would not have allowed so many people to enter. The burly man clearly thought that the clone was an immortal who hadn't come to the mortal world for a long time. After explaining the matters of the mortal world, he found an opportunity to cup his fists and say, "I am Tai Chengguang. May I ask how I should address this immortal?" The clone also gave his name and said, "My name is Zhang Fang. I'm just a Taoist cultivator, not an immortal." Tai Chengguang laughed, "To be able to fly in the sky, in my eyes, you're an immortal." Zhang Fang was moved. He asked, "Brother Tai, have you seen someone like me before?" Tai Chengguang shook his head, "I haven't, but there are rumors that Emperor Taizu was an immortal's disciple. His weapon was a high iron rui. He was invincible on the battlefield. I heard that it's still enshrined in the imperial ancestral temple." Zhang Fang thought, this person is most likely Zhenren Yan's disciple. Tai Chengguang saw that Zhang Fang's own was a celestial being, so he did not put on airs. Instead, he was very easy to talk to. He was also a man of character, so after they got to know each other, they started calling each other brothers. Whenever there was a question, he would answer it without holding back. "This time, I came to the Gu province under the instructor's orders to pursue the thief half a foot of gold. Although I caught up to him at the ferry crossing, it's a pity that the thief jumped into the river before he died. I only managed to cut off one of his arms. When I return, I'm afraid that the instructor will find an excuse to embezzle old Tai's reward." When he said this, he was very unhappy. Zhang Fang found out that this Tai Chengguang was also a military instructor, but he could only wear a blue scarf around his arm, so he was called the Blue Scarf Military Instructor. Usually, he was in charge of arresting robbers. Because of his straightforward personality, he often offended people. Every time there was a difficult case, the higher-ups would hand it over to him. Now that the case was over, he took the boat to the east and returned to his hometown, Pingbo Town, Hu County, Jizhou. Zhang Fang saw that they were heading to the place where he sensed the spiritual opportunity, so he did not leave. He simply found an excuse and went along with them. The boat flowed along with the river. At noon, it turned from the river to a waterway. After traveling for another 10 miles, it made a turn along a small hill. In the blink of an eye, the boat sped up a little. At this moment, he suddenly felt a strong spiritual vigor nearby. He turned his head to take a look. In the middle of the river, there was a small island at the center of the river. On the island, there was a stone turtle, looking up into the sky. He didn't know which stonemason had carved it, but it was really lifelike. There was even an offering table in front, and a few old men who looked like witches were burning incense and kowtowing. He was also surprised that the spiritual vigor was so strong. Previously, he could only sense a little bit of it. There must be something strange about this place. Perhaps the thing that he was looking for was here. Tai Chengguang saw that he was staring at the stone turtle and smiled. "Brother Zhang, are you curious that someone is kowtowing to this stone turtle? Legend has it that there used to be a water demon here. Every July or August, a celestial turtle came and turned into a stone to suppress it. Since then, there has been no more water here. However, every year around this time, there will be a tide meeting in the village. The first thing is to worship the celestial turtle, to bless me with good weather and smooth Dao journey. Other than this time, outsiders are not allowed to lie about it. Looking at the time, there are 3 more days until the tide meeting. If Brother Zhang is interested, I can bring you up for a tour." Zhang Fang pondered for a moment. If he wanted to find out what was going on, he would have to move the stone tortoise away. For fear of alerting others, he decided to come back at night to take a look. Therefore, he pretended to be very interested and agreed. After the boat went around River Heart Island, they went ashore at a ferry. Zhang Fang looked around and saw that this place was surrounded by mountains. It was shaped like a basin valley. Most of the houses were built along the mountains. Lanterns were hung in front of the houses. Boats came and went like a weave. Even though there were only about 1,000 households in this town, there were many merchants and it was a bustling place. He noticed that there was only a narrow waterway at both ends of the entrance. There was even a memorial archway with the words, Yi Mei Guan, written on it. If there was an invasion from outside, the waterway would be sealed and no one would be able to enter. He also saw some traces of prohibition formations, which confirmed his guess. Tai Chongguang came here but he had to submit his task first. Knowing that Zhang Fang was not familiar with the Tao, he found a young man with the surname Yu to lead the way. This young man was very attentive. After finding an inn for him to stay in, he poured tea for him and rushed back and forth. After settling down, Zhang Fang also ordered a table of food and wine and called him up to eat and drink together. The young man with the surname Yu wolfed down the food and felt full. He wiped his mouth and asked with a passionate gaze, "Sir, you are also a coach?" Zhang Fang smiled, "Why do you think so?" The young man with the surname Yu had an expression that said, "You can't hide it from me," and said proudly, "Tai Tu is a famous blue scarf coach here." If it wasn't for his inability to flatter his superiors, he would have already become a red scarf coach in the county. Normally, there aren't many people who can convince him. Even when the officials come to the county, he doesn't try to curry favor with them. Isn't it because he looks down on them for not having any ability? But he calls you Brother Zhang, so you must be a coach too. Zhang Fang smiled, "If I was a coach, what do you think?" The young man knelt down and kowtowed, "Teacher, please accept me as your disciple." Zhang Fang was startled and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Before he could reply, a loud laugh came from outside. "Brother Zhang, don't bother with him. Whenever this kid sees someone capable, he will go forward to acknowledge them as his master. I don't know how many times this has happened." As he spoke, Tai Chongguang strode in and picked up the young man with the surname Yu. He stuffed a string of copper coins into his hands and said, "Go, go, go. Go buy some food and clothes for yourselves. Don't disturb my brother's drinking." The young man nimbly took the coins and stuffed them into his bosom. His mouth was unconvinced and said, "If you don't want to teach, then don't. At worst, I'll just go into the mountains and look for someone. I'll definitely find someone more capable than you, Tai Tu, unlike you who can't find a wife." Tai Chongguang's face darkened and he looked like he was going to hit him. The young man was so frightened that he shrank his head and ran out. He cursed a few times and then sat down. Zhang Fang smiled and asked, "I see that this young man's constitution isn't bad. Brother Tai, what's wrong? You don't like him?" Tai Chongguang shook his head and said, "What's so good about being a coach? He spends his days with bandits and weasels. This brat's parents and I are old acquaintances. It's a pity that they died early. This is the only child in the family. I still hope that he can continue the family line and live a peaceful life. Once he walks this path, there's no turning back." When Zhang Fang heard this, he didn't say anything more and only focused on drinking with him. Under his deliberate urging, Tai Chongguang quickly got drunk. He also pretended to be unable to stand it and found someone to carry him out and arrange a guest room for him. Then, he closed the door and sat on the bed to meditate. After a few hours, it was already late at night. Only then did he sit up on the bed and push the window to take a look. It was already pitch black outside. Only a few large red lanterns were lit. He took a deep breath and his body became light. Like a wisp of smoke, he flew out and headed straight for the island. Very quickly, he arrived there and landed in front of the stone tortoise. He looked at it a few times and stepped forward, pushing it with force. The tortoise swayed slightly. Immediately, he knew what was going on. He took out a spell and immediately, clear and turbid chi revolved around it and slowly moved it to the side. Once the stone tortoise was gone, spiritual vigor shot up to the sky. It was more than 10 times stronger than before. When it reached the sky, there was even a strong gust of wind that filled the ears. At the same time, Zhang Yan, who was sitting in the hall of Duzhen, narrowed his eyes. He saw that after the spiritual vigor shot up, there was a qi dynamic that absorbed it. In just a moment, there was not a single drop left. He immediately noticed it. Seeing that it was about to disappear, he didn't hesitate and immediately summoned his own spirit to replace it. Then, he soared into the sky and sucked the strange qi into his stomach. Almost as soon as he made his move, the restriction in the cave was also activated. In an instant, his clone was pushed out of the cave. Zhang Yan waited for the avatar to come out, then he stretched out his hand and took the strange qi. After a while, he understood everything inside, so that's how it is. Sage Yan has put in a lot of effort. Initially, he thought that Jinren Yan wanted to imitate the 9 cities and bathe the people here in spiritual vigor so that he could choose a suitable disciple and teach them Dao techniques. Now that he looked at it, it was not the case. The number of people in this grotto heaven was not as many as he thought. From the beginning to the end, there were only about 100 people. The rest were just illusions that were condensed from mana and spiritual vigor. As there were many elixir jades hidden underground in the cave, they were constantly emitting spiritual vigor. That was how the illusions were maintained. They were like real people. Every day, they would go out to work, marry and have children. They would grow old and die. Even they might not be able to tell if it was real or fake. After the 100 real people talked to the illusions, there would be thoughts generated from time to time. They became more and more real. Naturally, they spread out and became illusions that spread all over the world. In reality, there was no Hu County, there was no Jie province, and there was no great Yan dynasty. However, when people felt the qi, they would be led into the illusions with a thought. It was different from the ordinary illusions. It seemed real and fake at the same time. There was truth in the fake. If they thought it was real, then it was real. The outside world was also evolving into life, death, war, and war. Of course, Jinren Yan did not spend so much effort to have fun. He was relying on these people to cultivate a strand of strange qi and then nurture a seed of thought. The reason for this was because the cultivation method left behind here was extremely difficult to learn. If a cultivator wanted to learn it, they would have to cultivate the sensory nerves. However, if they obtained this cultivation method, they would be able to skip this stage. As long as he refined it according to the incantation, and then infused his essence and spiritual vigor, he would be able to use it. Zhang Yan's eyesight was very good. He deduced that if this technique was used during a battle, not only would it disturb the senses of others, it could also create endless illusions when one's cultivation level was high. It was similar to some of the techniques of the Yuanshan sect. It was indeed a good supernatural power. However, although most of the people in the cave were fake, they were also evolving the wonders in one's heart. Therefore, what they experienced might not be fake. As he thought of this, his eyes became gloomy. About 3,000 years ago, north of Donghuacheng River, wasn't the dynasty of the mortal world named Yan? And one of the people had a similar appearance to Jinren Yan. What he evolved might be the events of the past. R1152. Chapter 951. Zhang Yan also sighed. After many grotto heaven enlightened masters passed away, the residences they left behind didn't have any disciples to take care of them, or their disciples opened up another grotto heaven. They didn't have any spiritual opportunities to nourish themselves and couldn't last long. However, if the Yingtsang sect's disciples obtained the spiritual seed and refined it, they would be able to add a formidable technique to their sect. With this kind of benefit, he was sure that the sect leader would not give up on this heavenly passage and would only try to maintain it. Though Changxing Yan gave the technique to the sect, he also protected the grotto heaven that he opened. If LV Junyang could step into the elephant phase realm, he could naturally take it over and become a Dao protector during the human calamity. Zhang Yan smiled. From his point of view, though inheriting the legacy of the predecessors could save him a lot of trouble, it was still better to open up a grotto heaven himself. This way, he would be able to understand all the changes within and wouldn't be taken advantage of by the enemy during battle. His gaze moved down and looked at the spiritual seed in his hand. Once the grotto heaven was involved, the spiritual seed in his hand wouldn't be of much use. Therefore, he was prepared to use another method. He added some precious materials and refined it into a magical treasure. That way, when he fought with an enemy, as long as he released it, he would be able to create all kinds of illusions. He could also use it to sense all kinds of qi. Even though it could not compare to Yan Changxing's spiritual senses, it could still be considered a great help. However, this matter wasn't urgent. Before that, there were still a few things he had to do. First, he had to refine the 3 true treasures. Though he placed a talisman in the true spirit and controlled its life and death, he still needed to put in some effort to use it as he wished. He took out the 3 talismans and let them shine brightly as they floated in the hall. He took a few glances and activated his mana. He gently spat out a wisp of clear air and split it into 3. He put them into his bag. At the same time, he activated the Jade Seal and activated the array of the Hall of Crossing Truth. It stirred up thousands of spiritual opportunities to help him refine it. The 3 treasures shuddered in unison. The true spirits in the room sensed that he was refining it. They opened up their own consciousness and cooperated with him, not daring to go against him. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Zhang Yan looked again and saw that after being refined by him, the 3 true artifacts were glowing naturally, and there was even a faint glow of warmth beneath them. As he swept his gaze across, they all trembled slightly. He knew that this was a perfect place, so wherever his thoughts went, they would resonate with him. He was also satisfied. He withdrew his thoughts and each of them let out a clear cry, turning into a precious light and entering his sleeve. Now that he had obtained the 3 treasures, he needed to think about how to deal with the great calamity. Qinsang School's future opponent was still unknown. However, he had to be prepared to fight against the entire world. If he wanted to survive the great calamity, he had to improve himself with all his might. He had previously fought with Luo Mengzi. After facing off with Chu and Mi and then fighting with Yan Changxing, he knew that battles between Grotto Heaven cultivators were extremely dangerous. Killing a Grotto Heaven cultivator was extremely difficult. And this was only in a one-on-one situation. In the human tribulation, no one would care about such rules. In particular, the more famous a person was, the more attention he would attract. Cultivation was the foundation. Apart from that, he would need to focus on the offensive and defensive sides. Therefore, what he needed to solve was to push his corporeal body to the 5th stage of strength transformation. The reason why he didn't choose to defend was because of this. However, the 5th stage of strength transformation might cause a huge commotion. However, reaching the 5th stage of force transformation realm could cause a huge commotion. Although there were restrictions in the Hall of Truth, he couldn't go all out. But now that he had the moon-traversing flying raft, he could go beyond the layer of heaven. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about being detected by his peers. Time waits for no man. After coming up with a plan, he had the intention to move. However, he didn't know how long it would take for him to return. As the Hall Master of Duzhen, he had to inform the sect leader. Therefore, he took a pen and paper and wrote a letter. Just as he was about to use his mana to send it to the upper extreme hall, he thought for a moment and called Jing Yu over. He instructed, "Take this letter and send it to the sect leader." "Do you know the way?" Jing Yu said, "Master, I have followed Jinren He there a few times before. I won't delay your matter." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "When you go, if the sect leader asks about Jinren He, you can answer him truthfully. If he doesn't ask, you don't have to say anything." Jing Yu's expression changed. He bowed and said, "I understand." Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and bowed to Jing Yu. He took the letter and left the hall. Zhang Yan reached into his sleeve and grabbed the jade medallion of the Hall of Truth Temple Lord. Focusing his energy on his eyes, he began to examine the cultivation bases of the 2 disciples. After a moment, he nodded and waved his finger, causing 2 talismans to appear. In the blink of an eye, they transformed into beams of spiritual light that shot into the immortal's cave. He thought about it again and realized that there was nothing urgent to deal with at the moment. Even if there was, he could deal with it after he returned. Hence, with a slight shake, his Dharmakaya turned into a wisp of smoke and floated away. In an instant, he had returned to his own body. Then, he stood up and walked out steadily. When he stood in front of the compass, he stretched out his hand and pressed on it. Suddenly, a ray of spiritual light shot up to the sky. Without a sound, it separated the 9 layers of clouds and revealed a smooth path that led to beyond the heavens. He waved his sleeves and threw the moon-crossing raft out. When the raft reached the outside world, he used his mana to activate it. It turned into 1,000 feet long and returned to its original appearance. On top, there was a pagoda and a jade pavilion. Below, there was a palace and a lush forest. 7 colors were used as decorations. 5 colors were painted. Green in spring, red in summer, gold in autumn, and white in winter. There were birds singing and birds singing. Warm smoke covered the pagoda. Clouds surrounded the trees and a fragrant wind blew. Zhang Yan took a look. The owner of the flying raft was actually a female cultivator from an aristocratic family from thousands of years ago. She was an extremely beautiful woman who used to hang around with flowers. However, this scenery was not to his liking. With a thought, he produced a cloud of fog and wrapped it around the raft. After a while, there was only a 9-story pagoda standing tall on the raft. He nodded and flew up to the pagoda. When his feet landed, the raft shook and turned into a bright light. It soared into the sky and in the blink of an eye, it was out of the sky. When he arrived, he looked around and saw that the void was vast and endless. Other than the sun and the moon, the stars in the distance were as small as rice grains. Looking at it from here, there were only twinkling lights. It was recorded in the ancient books in the Hall of Crossing Truth that when the cultivators of the West Continent felt that their spiritual vigor was waning, they went out of the sky to look for opportunities to see if there was a place to stay. However, most of the stars in the sky were barren places. There were no spiritual mountains or rivers. Even if there was spiritual vigor, it was mixed with strong poison. Even if it could be dissolved, it would consume a lot of energy. It was not worth it. Therefore, most of them returned without any success. However, there were a few who did not return. It was unknown whether they found a suitable place and settled down, or if their vitality was exhausted and they died outside. However, he did not roam around as he wished. There was a place to go. Because he was hurrying in the void, those with weaker cultivation would consume too much of their vitality. They could only turn back halfway and could not go further. Therefore, on that day, there were a few powerful cultivators who worked together to create a giant cauldron in the void called the Great Capacity Cauldron. It could be used by cultivators to rest their feet. Now that 20,000 years had passed, the object should still be there. If it was suitable, it would be a place for him to rest his feet. Zhang Yan told the real spirit of the flying raft in his mind and returned to the pagoda. He closed his eyes and meditated. The flying raft floated in the void. After a long time, he heard a call in his mind. "Master, we have reached the boundary of the earth." When he heard this, he opened his eyes and woke up from his meditative state. He did some calculations in his mind. A year had passed since he left the 9 continents. He got up and walked out of the pagoda. He looked around and saw a giant bronze cauldron floating in the void about a few thousand miles away. It was very big. If it was placed on the 9 continents, it would be at least the size of half a continent. At this moment, it was floating in the air. There were several thick chains tied to 5 bronze pillars. He knew that these were 5 spirit-stabilizing needles with magnetic force at both ends. They were refined by those powerful cultivators who harvested precious materials from the void. With them here, even if there was an external force, the treasured cauldron would not move to another place. After looking at it for a while, he put the flying raft into his sleeve and turned into a ray of light. He flew toward the cauldron. When he was about to get close, he felt an invisible obstacle in front of him. He was not surprised. He knew that it was a restriction on the outside of the cauldron. It was not that it was not set up to guard against cultivators like them. It was to prevent the poisonous fire from corroding the cauldron. He used a little force and crashed into it. There was a Tao-Tai pattern on the cauldron. He entered through its mouth and landed in a large hall after a while. He looked up and down. The place was empty and quiet. Ever since the cultivators of the West Continent decided to fight with the Sky Demon and moved to the East Continent, they gathered their fellow cultivators everywhere. The cultivators in the void also returned. Since then, no one had come to this place for tens of thousands of years. At this moment, he sensed some spiritual opportunity coming from his right side. His heart moved and he moved over. Before long, he entered a side hall. He saw a Taoist sitting on the ground. The Taoist had a peaceful expression as if he was meditating. However, he could see that this was just a shell. There was no vitality inside. From the style of the robe, he should be a cultivator of the West Continent. He looked again and saw words in front of him. He walked forward and saw that it said, "There are 10 boxes of pill jade in the hall. If you need it, you can take it yourself. Don't forget to replenish it in the future." He moved his gaze downward and wrote, "Solitary swan bow his head." Zhang Yan subconsciously nodded. He knew that there was an unwritten rule here. The almighty cultivators who worked together to refine this cauldron had left behind many Dan jades here. If a cultivator came here and lost too much of their primordial essence qi, they could take some and use it. But no matter how much was used, they had to find a way to make up for it in the future. Just now, the spiritual opportunity that he felt should be the remaining pill jade. However, most of them had been lost in the past tens of thousands of years. Since it was left by the senior, he would not act rashly. Moreover, it was not that he did not come unprepared. Outside the heavens, he had to face the poisonous fire and strong wind. Even though he had the flying raft to protect him, and his cultivation was profound, but to prevent any accidents, he brought a lot of Duzhan Hall's Dan jades. He bowed to the Taoist's body. He walked one round in the hall and set up a few restrictions. He sat down at the side and reached into his sleeve to take out the devil's slip. Chapter 952. In Zhang Yan's magic slip, after absorbing the remains of several sky demons, it was full of essence. If he had no worries and cultivated according to the cultivation method passed down by the demon treasury, it wouldn't be hard for him to break through the barrier and leap into the 5th realm of the divine contract. However, once he entered this realm, he would have to abandon himself and become one with the demon, which he didn't want to do. But if he gave up just like that, the cultivation method he cultivated before would be equivalent to giving up halfway. Hence, he wanted to find another way. With another flick of his sleeve, a black light flashed and a rumbling sound was heard. When the light dissipated, a large pavilion was erected in midair. It was 100 feet tall and had 6 floors. There were ferocious beasts climbing on the eaves and pillars. It was a terrifying sight to behold. He walked into the room, and at this moment, his feet shook slightly. When he looked up again, the scenery around him seemed to have returned to the void, and in the 4 directions, there were 12 towering demon images, each of them shrouded in mist, unable to discern their true appearance. After looking at it coldly for a few times, he sat down cross-legged and continued to follow the usual routine. First, he refined the mystic blood with the divine ability, then he used the mortal incarnation technique to cut off the mystic blood's head, and finally, he condensed an external incarnation. At this step, he threw the magic slip into the middle of the eyebrows of the incarnation, and then he silently chanted the incantation, activating the essence qi. Under his guidance, his cultivation gradually rose, and not long after, he entered the 4th level of the strength path. But to raise one's cultivation like this, it could be said to be water without a source. If there was no essence qi to fill the body, it wouldn't take long before the technique would dissipate, and he would once again fall to the mortal realm. If it didn't have a use, it would just be a waste of essence qi. At this moment, he released it, but decided to use this incarnation to circulate his cultivation method. After it broke through to the 5th level, he would destroy its soul, and finally, like taking over a body, he would use the body for himself. But whether or not it would work, he still needed to try to know. He split out a part of his soul and sent it into the incarnation. With a slight urge, it stood up, and walked to the south, standing in front of a demon image. After a short while, a brilliant light flew down from above. It entered the middle of the eyebrows. Just like before, he passed down a cultivation technique. After looking through it once, he realized that it was exactly the same as the last time, so he no longer hesitated. He willed it. The doppelganger immediately activated his chi according to the incantation. At the same time, the devil realm continuously sent over essence chi for him to absorb. When he was about to reach that step, the demonic avatar moved and seemed to look around. However, it completely ignored the avatar and looked towards where he was instead. In that instant, Zhang Yan felt a vast wave of consciousness resonate with his own soul, as if it was going to enter his own body if it went any further. His brows furrowed as he knew that something was wrong. He immediately had the avatar stop its cultivation, and as soon as it stopped, the devil statue stopped moving as well. His eyes flickered as he thought to himself, so that's how it is. He was clearly using his doppelganger to circulate his technique, but the demonic image still pointed directly at his real body. If it was before, he probably wouldn't know the reason behind this, but after he formed his own cave, he naturally understood the logic behind it. This was because the part of his soul that resided in his doppelganger lacked a root and didn't have a master. The so-called root here referred to a person's past and present, while the master referred to the true consciousness that was born after a person was born. This part of the soul came from his body, and its memories and consciousness were all created by him. It wasn't something he was born with. It was like a part of his limbs that didn't exist in the world alone. Therefore, once he activated his technique, the demon avatar would still merge with his real body. As for how to resolve this, he had his own solution. What he did before was to throw this part of the soul into the world and let it roll around in the mortal world. After a few lives or a dozen lives, it would be tainted by the impurities of the mortal world. Naturally, it wouldn't have anything to do with him. However, this method would take a long time. Also, as long as he paid attention to it with his spiritual sense or tried to calculate it, there would be an additional pull. All he could do was ignore it. If that was the case, how could he let this reincarnated body cultivate the contract of comprehending the divine? Although it wasn't that there was no solution, it undoubtedly required a lot of planning. However, after the battle with Yan Changsheng and obtaining the grotto heaven that he left behind, he had another option. He took out a spiritual seed from his sleeve. As long as there was enough spiritual vigor, this item could create an illusion and evolve into the mortal world. Then, he would throw that part of the soul into this place and let it reincarnate, so that it would give birth to its own consciousness. With a gentle guidance, the spiritual vigor from the spiritual seed was injected. Immediately, it evolved into a mystical chi and produced an illusion. The origin of this was the thoughts of the living people in Yan Changsheng's small world, and it was mixed with the spiritual chi. He looked over and saw a quiet valley first. There were men, women, old and young farming in it. Gradually, there were people who entered the mountains to collect herbs, and there were people who thought of selling in the county. The city was formed naturally, and the world followed the desires of the people and gradually expanded outwards. In the beginning, regardless of whether it was the people, birds, flowers, trees, mountains, or rivers, their faces were unclear. They were fragmented and disjointed. However, in the end, as more and more people were born, the 7 emotions and 6 desires in the spiritual seed were spread out, and the world gradually became clearer. It was like a splash ink landscape painting that was finally colored. It was no longer as erratic as before, as if it could dissipate at any time. At this point, Zhang Yan knew that there was no need for him to interfere anymore. He caught a part of the soul and the magic slip and threw it into the spiritual seed. After doing this, he went to the side and meditated, not going to watch any longer. As for when it would be completed, he had no way of guessing. He could only wait patiently. However, with the magic slip coming and going, and just now, the cultivation method of the contract of comprehending the divine was already connected. No matter how muddle-headed it was only a matter of time before it was targeted by the magic slip and led to this path. When that time came, he could make his move. There was only one concern. Once it combined with the demonic form and achieved something, it would no longer be its original self. It could very well break free and hurt its owner. However, he had already reached the heavenly abode realm. Not to mention the sun-embracing axe, he had 3 true weapons in his hands to protect him, so he was not afraid. Moreover, he had nothing to worry about in the heavenly abode. No matter how big the commotion was, no one in the 9 continents would be able to sense it. The illusory realm evolved like a dream. Only one night had passed in the outside world, but dozens of years had passed in this world. In the valley that Zhang Yan had observed before, the village of dozens of people had already become a mountain town with thousands of people. On this day, a couple in the town gave birth to a baby boy. He was born intelligent and was sent to school. He had a photographic memory and was extremely intelligent. His teachers were all very happy. When he was 15 years old, he passed the provincial exam and went to the capital to take the exam. When he arrived at the county town, he saw a lonely old man selling a donkey. He took pity on the old man and bought an old donkey with the money he used to buy a horse. At night, when he was staying at the inn, a thief saw his tender face and broke in through the window. Just as he was about to steal, the donkey screamed in the middle of the night and scared the thief away, saving his goods. The young man was ignorant and did not know why he failed the exam. He could only return to his hometown. Halfway through, he slept in the mountains and heard the cries of ghosts. Just as he was bewildered, he saw 10 odd people swarming in, saying that there were ghosts and spirits here and that they had received guidance from someone. They wanted him to solve a case. The young man was not afraid. The case was not complicated. Every time he solved a case, a ghost would come out and capture the criminal. They would either interrogate or sentence him, and he could not help but be amazed. When dawn came, everything was cleared. The ghosts kowtowed and thanked him. After this incident, the young man knew that there were ghosts and spirits in the world. From then on, he no longer had any desire for fame. After returning to his hometown, he led the old donkey everywhere to seek immortality. It was just that after that, he didn't encounter any more strange things in his life. 7 years later, he caught a cold on the road. Due to the lack of medicine, he died in a broken-down temple. As for the old donkey, he turned into a streak of light and flew away. After that, he went through several reincarnations. In every life, he was entangled with a strange item. After another 10 lives, he was infected with more and more, as if he was sinking into a dye vat. Finally, his connection with the main soul was cut off. At the same time, Zhang Yan had an inexplicable feeling. He opened his eyes and knew that the first step was completed. He calculated and realized that it had been 3 years since he started meditating. He looked around. At this moment, the strange qi was constantly being nurtured by the spiritual vigor of the elixir jade. It extended outwards and occupied a corner of the cauldron. It was obvious that the illusion was becoming more complete. At this moment, the spiritual vigor needed was increasing. However, it was obvious that he could not stop now. Otherwise, all his previous efforts would be wasted. Fortunately, he was from the Qinsang school's Duzhen Hall and had achieved Dao. He did not care much about the elixir jade. If it were someone else, even if they had the same wealth, they would not be willing to do so. However, if he could really succeed in the end, it would be worth it. He smiled and closed his eyes to meditate again. In the illusion, after a few reincarnations, the separated soul was born into an official's family. When he was born, he held a jade glaze in his hand. It was so bright that it could reflect the person. Since he was young, he lived in luxury and was surrounded by servants. When he was 18 years old, there was an incident in the court and his family was implicated. He was sent to prison. A few years later, he was pardoned and was able to see the light of day again. Because he had no skills, he could only write letters to make a living. He was hungry and full. When he was 30 years old, he married a prostitute and had a son. Although it was hard, they loved each other and helped each other in times of need. They were barely able to get by. Who knew that an epidemic would kill his wife and son? Since then, he was disheartened and had no more thoughts of living. When he was outside the city, he tied a rope to a tree and wanted to commit suicide. However, he was saved by a Taoist who persuaded him to enter the path of Tao with just a few words. He did not know if it was because of his extraordinary physique or because he had cut off all worldly thoughts, but after he entered the path of Tao, his journey was smooth. In just a short 60 years, he could fly between heaven and earth and control the rain and wind. Although immortals and mortals were different, there was no lack of battles. When his sect was attacked, he escaped alone. After cultivating for 100 years, he went to seek revenge. However, he was still no match for the enemy. The mana that he had painstakingly cultivated was destroyed. Before he died, he made a vow that if he could take revenge, he would be willing to fall into the path of evil forever. As soon as he made this wish, a ray of clear light suddenly descended and covered his soul. Then, it was cast towards the doppelganger and disappeared in an instant. After a few breaths, one of the demonic images suddenly collapsed and turned into thousands of light rays that merged into the doppelganger. At the same time, the whole great capacity cauldron seemed to feel it and also slightly trembled. Floating Astronomy. Chapter 953. Zhang Yan was also alarmed at this moment. He calmly stood up and looked over. Around the avatar, demon flames surged out and covered the large cauldron in an instant. The scarlet-purple light lit up the void. Fortunately, he was not in the 9 continents. Otherwise, even with the protection of the Duzhan Hall, it would be hard to guarantee that no one would notice the commotion. However, even though this demon form was formed, it would not listen to him. He needed to use some methods to subdue it before he could use it. At this moment, the illusory world in the hall was affected by the external qi. It dispersed and turned into strands of strange qi that were about to disperse. Zhang Yan identified it and waved his hand again. He kept one strand of strange qi and had an epiphany. He knew everything about the avatar's life. Then, he waved his sleeves and kept all the pill jades in the hall. Even the ones in the large cauldron were taken away to prevent them from being used by the other party. After waiting for several dozen breaths, the light burst like sparks and suddenly jumped outwards, revealing a 6-horned demon with a coiled head, 3 eyes, and 5 legs. Black dragons coiled around its arms, black smoke under its feet, and scarlet-purple flames coiled around its body. However, this appearance only flashed for a moment. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared and turned into the appearance of a young Taoist. This person was somewhat similar to him. His bones were like jade, his appearance was bright, his eyes were bright, and his skin was glowing. His body was surrounded by auspicious clouds, as if he was made of snow and jade. He had the appearance of a celestial. No matter how one looked at him, he was a Taoist master. Zhang Yan was not surprised. From the technique, he could see that the demon form changed according to his thoughts and did not care about its true appearance. However, it could be seen from this. At this moment, the strand of soul had not truly merged with the demon form. The human side still had the upper hand. That was why there was such a change. Otherwise, it would not care about the change in appearance. The avatar was still confused, but after a moment, his eyes became clear. He saw Zhang Yan standing far away and was a little surprised. Then, he noticed that the person in front of him had monstrous mana. It was the enemy he had seen earlier. He immediately became vigilant and asked in a deep voice, "Who are you? Where is this place?" Zhang Yan laughed and said, "Since you are me, I am you." This was where they came from. It's the other side again. Although the doppelganger had lived dozens of lives in the illusory realm, it was still able to survive. But to him, everything he had experienced in his life was real, and it was impossible for him to know the true origins of his family. Hearing those words, he frowned and said, "Nonsense." He could feel the boundless power within his body. It was as if he could flip the heavens and overturn the earth with just a light wave of his arms and legs. However, the more it was like this, the more he could feel that Zhang Yan was not ordinary. The surging mana that was as vast as the sea was extremely oppressive to him. Furthermore, looking at his face, it seemed that he was somewhat related to his family. Instinctively, he wanted to avoid it, so he took a step forward and flew out. Zhang Yan smiled and let him go, not stopping him. There was only one exit in this side hall. The moment the doppelganger reached the door, he was blocked by an invisible barrier and had to stop. He snorted, puffed out his chest, and blew out a breath in front of him. In that instant, it was like a surging river. With a loud rumble, the huge cauldron actually shook back and forth after being hit by this breath. Zhang Yan squinted his eyes slightly. A rank 5 body was indeed extraordinary. If he was in the land of the 9 continents, just this breath alone could sweep through the continents, topple mountains, and destroy countries. But even with such power, it still could not break through the layer of restriction he had set up. Although he did not attack many places, the arrangement was extremely ingenious, and it was almost connected to the cauldron. In other words, although all the external forces that came crashing into the restriction, they were all withstood by the treasured cauldron itself. One must know that this cauldron was refined by several ancient great cultivators. Even though no one had cared about it for tens of thousands of years, and the restrictions of the past had already disappeared, the foundation was still there. The cauldron was abnormally strong. How could it be broken so easily? But if it was a person who knew a little about restrictions, as long as he attacked the important parts, it would not be difficult to get out. But this doppelganger's consciousness had only entered Tao for 100 years, and did not understand the key points. Seeing that he could not break through the restriction, his expression darkened, and his body grew to a height of 10,000 feet, as big as a mountain, and with a fierce shout, he slammed into the cauldron. With a loud rumble, it was as if the world was collapsing. The power this time was even fiercer than the last time. If there were not 4 spirit stabilizing needles outside the cauldron to support it, it would probably be flipped over. But even so, after trying several times, he still could not get out. He could not help but reveal a slightly anxious expression. At this moment, his mind was still thinking about how to go back and take revenge. Even though his supernatural powers came out of nowhere, he felt that his head was a little dizzy, and his consciousness was gradually becoming unclear. Moreover, the more he used his supernatural powers, the deeper he sank into it. Therefore, his heart was extremely uneasy, afraid that he would not know when he would lose consciousness, and he was anxious to get out of this place. After trying a few more times, he found that this method was not feasible anymore. He closed his eyes and meditated for a moment. When he opened his eyes again, his body shook and turned into 10,000 wisps of smoke. They floated around, as if they wanted to find a way out. But after looking for a long time, they could not find the way out. Therefore, he changed again. Every wisp of smoke turned into an iron-beaked bird with a wingspan of several feet. They had red eyes and red toes, white feathers, and black heads. Their feathers were like copper coins. In an instant, there were tens of thousands of them. The air was filled with the sound of their wings flapping, and they all pounced on the cauldron to peck at it. When one of them was exhausted, the other would immediately follow, wave after wave, endlessly. The entire hall was filled with the sound of the bird pecking, as if it wanted to break a way out from the inside out. Zhang Yan saw this and raised his eyebrows. He thought to himself, so there is such a supernatural power. The technique that says that it is ever-changing is really not empty words. One must know that this doppelganger had just merged with the demonic form, and especially at this moment, it still maintained its consciousness. It could be assumed that there were many supernatural powers that it could not use, and yet it could already have such transformations. If it reached a higher level, who knows what other tricks it could have. Looking again, In just a short while, these birds had actually pecked out a big hole on the cauldron wall. It was still too early to say that there was a way out, but dripping water could wear a stone, and rope could cut wood. If this continued, as long as the opponent did not exhaust his strength, he would be able to escape sooner or later. Seeing this, he had to move. He stretched out his hand and pointed. Lightning flashed, and he used the little 5 elements devil-slaying divine thunder. Now that this supernatural power was being used by him, the moment it was released, the void shook, and the impact spread for thousands of miles. In the large cauldron, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled continuously. There was also a power that could ward off evil and slay devils. As long as the birds were hit by the lightning, they would immediately be smashed into pieces and turned into dust. The remaining few knew that it was not good, and after they cried out in unison, they turned into smoke and gathered together, once again turning into the appearance of the young Taoist. At this moment, he was shocked and angry. He shouted angrily, and still raised his body to a height of 10,000 feet, and put his arm horizontally in front of him to block. In the next moment, his entire arm was smashed into pieces, and flesh and blood flew everywhere. Even he leaned back and took a few steps back, but just now he stood still, and the broken arm grew out again. Fear appeared in his eyes, as if he was extremely afraid of the devil-slaying divine thunder. He took a light breath, and with a "ha," he spat out a red and purple flame, which blocked the attacking lightning outside. However, the lightning was endless, and after a few breaths, he was forced to retreat. Zhang Yan was expressionless. Taking advantage of the time when he was tired of dealing with the lightning, he unfolded his dharma, and the chaotic Xian Qi covered the sky and the earth, surrounding him from all directions. At this moment, the clone was shouting angrily, and he could no longer care about the consciousness invasion. He repeatedly used his mana, but this way, although the power of his every move was much stronger, his expression gradually became crazy. Zhang Yan's eyes were deep, and he saw this change in his eyes. After seeing the cultivation method, he understood that this was because the knot with the devil was getting deeper and deeper, and it was difficult to suppress his nature, and it was released. Although he looked crazy, at least there was still a trace of humanity left. If he reached the point where he completely merged with the devil, he was afraid that he would be completely obliterated, and there would be no more self. Because the clone had lost his mind, he couldn't judge the situation of the battle at all. After fighting for another half an hour, the Xian Qi surrounded him. Seeing this, Zhang Yan made up his mind. At this point, no matter how it changed, it would be difficult to escape. Spiritual Master Dong Tian relied on the essence of his origin, and even though the body of strength was different, it had its own place to rely on. Being trapped inside, he could rely on his deep mana to slowly consume the vitality. Sure enough, for more than 10 days, the clone rushed left and right in the Xian Qi, and used several magical powers, but he still couldn't kill his way out. Gradually, he showed signs of weakness, and there was no way to resist. Seeing that the time was right, Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. Right now, he just needed to go forward and kill the split soul in the demon body, and then he could take it for his own use. The reason why he dared to let the clone grow was because he had enough mana to suppress it, and he still had a backup plan, which was the demonic slip. Previously, he allowed it to hide in the body and didn't call it back. It was for this moment. With a thought, the demon subduing slip suddenly exploded, and it released a green light. In an instant, it captured the split soul. The sudden change happened, and the clone's energy was exhausted, so he couldn't react at all. His body instantly froze. At the same time, a cold light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes. He pointed out, and a spiritual light like a sword shot into the center of the clone's eyebrows. In an instant, the split soul was destroyed. With the loss of his soul and the absence of a ruler, his body naturally became an empty shell and fell from the sky. Zhang Yan tried to sense it again, but he frowned. Because of the demonic slip, he could see the changes in the clone's body from head to tail. When the demon invaded the body, there was a bit of demonic nature that tainted the soul. As time went on, it got deeper and deeper. Just now, after his slash, the soul was destroyed, and the demonic nature was destroyed. But at this moment, he could clearly feel that there was still a weak bit of demonic nature hidden in the body. Zhang Yan's mind changed. He was different from the clone, and he had the cultivation of grotto heaven. This bit of demonic nature was something that he could suppress with his mental fortitude. However, if he left it alone, it would be a hidden danger. He had to get rid of it before he could control it. In the world, if we talk about killing demons, my Qinsang school can be said to be number one. But in terms of killing demons, Huanjin Temple is the best. When I go back, maybe I can go there and see if I can find a secret technique to suppress it. P.S. There's one more update, slightly later. Chapter 954. Zhang Yan stopped thinking and walked forward. When he reached the front of the avatar, he did not stop and continued to move forward. However, it was as if he had passed through an illusionary smoke. With a gentle shake of his shoulder, the avatar slowly entered his body and merged into one. He silently observed. Ever since he left the 9 continents and arrived beyond the heavens, it had been 10 years. Although he had obtained the body of strength path and achieved his goal, in the eyes of his peers outside the sect, after the battle with Yan Changsheng, he had used up a lot of his vitality. Now he should be recovering his vitality in the Duzhen Hall, so he wasn't in a hurry to return. Moreover, he still needed to familiarize himself with the various changes in the demon body. It wouldn't be as convenient when he was in the 9 continents. Although the great containment cauldron was not damaged in the battle earlier, this large hall was already in a terrible state. A couple of large pillars were also on the verge of collapse. It was time to change to another hall. However, at this moment, he suddenly sensed that something was amiss. When he arrived, there was the remains of an ancient cultivator in the side chamber. The remains of such an ancient cultivator shouldn't have been innocently attacked. Therefore, before the battle, he casually sent it to the side chamber, so it wasn't damaged. However, it was originally facing the south, but at this moment, it was inexplicably facing a different direction. His eyes flashed. This place was in the void. If there was an outsider here, he would have noticed it immediately. If it wasn't from the outside, then it must be from the inside. He waved his sleeves forward and floated near the corpse. He glanced at it and instantly found something strange. There was a weak spiritual light in its chest. He reached out and an item appeared in his palm. Looking at it carefully, it was a crystal clear jade spoon. It was only 6 inches long and was smooth and smooth. There was no flaw on its entire body. He used his spiritual sense to check it out and instantly knew what was going on. This jade spoon was actually a real treasure. Even though no one had refined it for 10,000 years, there was still a shred of true consciousness left in it. Just now, when he fought with the demon, he shook the cauldron and startled it. That was why the corpse moved. It only woke up for a short while. It dissipated on its own. However, at this moment, Zhang Yan sensed a familiar aura. He stretched out his hand and wisps of black smoke drifted out from between his fingers. He was certain. This was a magic treasure of the demonic path. But inside. However, there was one thing that he did not understand. Today's devil sect had 2 origins. One was from the Western continent's heterodox practitioners. Back then, they had entered the demon's cave to suppress the demon and then passed down their teachings. The Blood Soul sect and the other 4 sects had all come here because of this. As for the other one, it was passed down by cultivators from beyond the heavens. Only the Nether Spring sect was able to survive to this day and was still known to the world. However, more than 10,000 years ago, there was no Devil's Cave in the original Western continent. Naturally, there were no Devil's Sect techniques. This jade spoon might have come from another place. However, no matter how amazing this treasure was, once the true consciousness within it dissipated, it became an ordinary item. However, its texture was strange. Even Zhang Yan could not tell what kind of precious jade it was made from. After thinking about it, he decided to ignore it for now. When he returned to the Duzhen Hall, he would look through the books and see if he could find its origins. He shook his sleeve and put the treasure in. Then, he sat cross-legged on the ground and silently circulated his cultivation technique. East Hua Continent, Qinsang School, 10 Peaks Mountain. Originally, there was only a simple and crude cave abode on the mountain peak. It was a place for the 10 first seats to rest. However, after Chen Feng took over as the first seat, he had spent a great deal of effort to build several palaces on the mountain because he was originally from the Chen clan and loved to enjoy life. Not just him, he also built flying peaks and flowing rivers, pavilions, and planted strange flowers and trees on the other peaks. After this round of repair, it was completely different from before. The original place where the disciples fought had become filled with flowers and was filled with spirit energy, causing it to seem like a paradise for cultivation. Seeing this, the other disciples also moved here to cultivate. It was also convenient for them to discuss and exchange knowledge. However, today, there would be a letter flying in the sky from time to time. Occasionally, there would be a whistle or two. Anyone could tell that something big must have happened. In front of a circular door in the palace, Chen Feng held the letter in his hand and read it carefully. However, his expression was very solemn. In a few years, it would be the day that the Devil's Den would appear. Blood Soul Zongxian knew that Qinsang wanted to stop him from entering the battle for the Devil's Denver. Therefore, he had been moving out frequently recently. The two sides had fought no less than 10 times. Fortunately, many of the elites in his sect had died in the previous battles. Now, he was really unwilling to fight against Qinsang. Every time he suffered a small setback, he would retreat in a hurry. However, there was news just now that numerous altars in the southwest had been breached, and an elder of the Chen clan that was originally standing on guard there had been killed. Moreover, the killer was the Nether Spring sect's elder, Lu Rongnyang. Chen Feng put down the letter and frowned. Lu Rongnyang's purpose for coming here was obvious. She definitely wanted to help the Blood Soul sect break through the siege. However, this person was not simple. He was an elder of the Nether Spring sect and had long cultivated to the 3rd stage. He was of the same generation as Bailey Qingyin in the past. Especially since he had a damaged true artifact, Bei Sansha, he was not easy to deal with. However, he was hesitant. Should he strengthen his defense or take the initiative to attack? As the head of the 10 great disciples, although he had the support of the aristocratic families, perfected cultivator Chen had passed away. There were not many people he could use. It had taken a lot of effort to trap the Blood Soul sect. Although a few managing elders of the Crossing Truth Hall had come, it was not the time to decide victory. He did not want to reveal his strength too early. Moreover, if he lost too many people in the battle, it was very likely that he would not be able to maintain the original siege. Then, he would not have the face to sit in this position anymore. However, it was not appropriate to ignore it. If he dealt with it passively, he would eventually reveal flaws. He thought about it but could not make up his mind. He sighed in his heart. From the outside, as the head, he only needed to give orders. However, it was not easy to actually sit in this position. Thinking back to the time when Zhang Yan did not have the support of a heavenly abode master, he was able to destroy 2 devil's caves in the end. While he was thinking, a servant said, "Master, Elder Shao of the Daylight Hall has come to visit." Chen Feng's expression changed. He stretched out his hand and said, "Invite him in." Not long after, he saw a Taoist with a long beard that reached his chest walk in. The Taoist smiled and bowed to him, saying, "Junior brother Chen, I haven't seen you for a long time. I see that you are frowning, is there something troubling you?" Chen Feng was an upright person and had always treated people he was familiar with sincerity. Therefore, he did not hide anything and said frankly, "There is indeed a problem. Since senior brother is here, you can help me." Xiao Sha smiled and pointed at him, "You are relying on me. Fine, tell me about it. If it is not difficult, I will help you." Chen Feng was overjoyed and quickly told him what happened. He cupped his hands and said, "Senior brother has always had an extraordinary understanding. May I ask what I should do?" Xiao Sha listened and thought for a while. In the end, he laughed and said with a deep meaning, I think this is not a bad thing. Instead, it is a good thing. Chen Feng said, what do you mean? Xiao Sha's eyes flashed. He said, Junior brother, let me ask you. Even if you killed a few Blood Soul sect disciples, what can you do? He pointed in the direction of the floating heavenly palace and said, Senior brother Do used to sit in this position just like you, but he's still not an elder. Why? He still can't be promoted. Junior brother, you must grasp this opportunity. Among the 3 halls of Qinsang School, other than the upper extreme hall, the Daylight Hall and Duzhen Hall's side hall masters had to have made great contributions and be the first seat of the top 10 disciples. Although Duda had been one of the 10 first seats, he had only been there for a short time. There was no chance for him to make any contributions. Therefore, when he went to the Daylight Hall, he was only an elder and not a side hall master. Chen Feng thought for a while and said, I know what senior brother is saying, but I am not strong enough. Especially this time, I suspect that the Netherworld Spring sect has a backup plan. It is not that simple. Why don't senior brother come out and help me? Xiao Sha was an elder of the Daylight Hall. His cultivation had reached the 3rd stage and he had many disciples under him. Especially since they were all from aristocratic families, if they could come out and help him, he could do many things that he did not dare to do. Xiao Sha said in surprise, didn't the Duzhen Hall send a few elders? Is it not enough? Chen Feng said, these elders are of high status. It is not good for me to order them around. Besides, that Lu Rongnyang is not easy to deal with. If I hurt them, it will be hard to explain to Hall Master Zhang. If he misunderstood that I did this on purpose, it would not be good. Xiao Sha thought for a while and nodded. He said, that is true. He could understand Chen Feng's concerns. These elders were mostly disciples of the same master and disciple. They were also the managing elders of the Duzhen Hall in name. If there were many casualties, it would not be difficult for Zhang Yan, as the hall master of the Duzhen Hall, to cause some trouble for the aristocratic families. He stroked his beard and his eyes flickered. He said, if that is the case, I can give junior brother an idea. Not only can it solve this problem, it can also remove a hidden danger. Chen Feng looked at him and said, Senior brother, if you have something to say, please speak frankly. Xiao Sha said slowly, Junior brother Chen, do you know that 10 years ago, there were 2 people who followed Hall Master Zhang back to the sect? Chen Feng nodded. He said, I know about this. Those 2 people are Yan's disciples. Xiao Sha said, although Yan is dead, the sect master is still generous to his disciples. On the surface, it looks like he is punishing them to suffer in the little cold realm. In fact, he is allowing them to cultivate in the sect. Let's not talk about Jiao Yuanliang, but Yuan Hongyang is very talented. He is very likely to become the Grotto Heaven Master. Chen Feng was slightly moved. He said, Senior brother, you mean? Xiao Sha smiled. He said, Junior brother, you can go to the sect master and ask for these 2 people's help. Before this, Yuan Hongyang has followed Yan to cultivate. He has never done anything for the sect. It is not proper for him to cultivate in the sect. If there is such an opportunity to make a contribution, the sect master will definitely agree. If he is defeated, we can cut off his path to the Jin dynasty. If he wins, junior brother will have made a great contribution. In the future, it will not be difficult for you to become the master of the side hall. At this point, he said meaningfully, although senior brother Hua is 1 step ahead, junior brother, it is not impossible for you to catch up. Chapter 955. Inside the little cold world, thousands of miles of ice were sealed and gray clouds covered the sky. A ray of light flew out from the thick fog and arrived in front of a cliff that was covered in snow. As soon as the light landed on the ground, it dissipated like a bubble. Jiao Yuanliang walked out of it and muttered something. With a wave of his hand, a strong wind swept away all the snow on the mountain top, revealing a stone door that was as tall as a person. He pushed the door open and walked in. With another wave of his sleeve, he closed the door and isolated the wind and snow outside. Then, he took out a bottle of Huanyang wine from his sleeve and placed it next to his mouth. He took a small sip and after a while, his body was filled with warmth. Outside, the 9 nether cold wind would blow every 12 hours. If one's cultivation was slightly weaker, they would freeze on the ground. Even though he was a Yuanying cultivator, after a long time, he would feel a trace of coldness seeping into his bones. Drinking this wine, not only could it get rid of the coldness, it could also relieve his worries. However, there was very little of this wine. It was given to him by the Taoist who guarded the door before he entered the little cold world. From then on, he could only get 1 bottle every year. He was not willing to drink more. After a few sips, he kept the wine bottle and took out a silk handkerchief to wipe the corner of his mouth. After cleaning up, he walked into the depths of the cave. After walking for a short distance, he exited the tunnel. The top of his head opened up. At this moment, he was standing in a cave on a cliff. A few steps forward, there was a deep ravine. A rope bridge was built on top of a cliff 100 steps away from the other side. He was not in a hurry to go over. Instead, he took out a handful of red jade fruits from his sleeve. There were about 10 of them and he threw them out. In the stream below, there was a splash. The jade wave flying sword leaped out from the long stream. It sucked and swallowed all of the fruits. Then, it waved its tail at him 3 times and fell back into the water. Behind him, there was only a splash of icy mist. Only then did Zhao Yuanliang dare to go over. With a flick of his sleeve, he rode the wind and arrived at the other end of the pier in a flash. He also found a cave door and quickly walked in, arriving at a hall in the cave. From bottom to top, this hall was about 100 feet high. It was very spacious. In the middle, there were several stone platforms that could accommodate 1,000 people. The shattered rocks around them formed a staircase. Along the way, there were lit candles on both sides, and every 10 steps up, there would be a deep niche on the stone wall, with a skeleton sitting in it. There were many jade slips on the table. He tapped the ground. He flew into the air. At the highest point of the stone platform, a young Taoist dressed in a plain robe sat on the stone platform. His clothes were spotless. At this moment, he was carefully examining the jade slip. Zhao Yuanliang walked over and asked in confusion, most of these jade slips were written by core formation cultivators before they died. With senior Marshall Brothers cultivation level, what's the use of reading them? LV Junyang sat up straight and looked straight at him. He said, great enlightenment can only be obtained between life and death. This is something that cannot be found in ordinary Taoist books. Junior brother, if you have the time, why don't you take a look? Perhaps you will gain something from it. When Zhao Yuanliang's eyes met his, at that moment, there seemed to be a flash of light. He couldn't help but be shocked. When he looked again, it was still the same as before, as if just now was just an illusion. He thought to himself, looks like senior Marshall Brothers cultivation has improved again. Could it be that studying these incomplete jade slips is really useful? He casually picked one up, and he only took a few glances before disdain arose in his heart. Even though these were comprehensions before his death, as far as he was concerned, they were too shallow and not worth mentioning at all. He shook his head and tossed them aside, and then he went to sit down at the side and closed his eyes to meditate. Soon, more than 10 days passed. He opened his eyes and saw that LV Junyang was still there. His posture had not changed, as if only a moment had passed. He laid down and took out the wine. He gulped down a few mouthfuls. Seeing that it was almost empty, he quickly closed it but felt that it was not enough to satisfy his craving. He couldn't help but sigh. Usually, he could only drink alone. He didn't like wine, but after holding it in for so long, he felt that he was about to become a drunkard. He raised his head and looked at the big incense above. When it finished burning, he would have to go out on patrol again. He suddenly felt a stuffiness in his chest and complained, other than us 2 brothers, no one else has come here in recent years. There is also that cold dragon outside. Even if a third-stage realm cultivator came here, he wouldn't have a good time. I don't know what's so good about guarding it. LV Junyang was calm and said, cultivation is everywhere. Sect leader has taken care of the two of us. There won't be any outsiders to disturb us here, so we can cultivate in peace. Jiao Yuanliang snorted and asked casually, Senior Martial Brother, do you know who is imprisoned in the depths of the world? LV Junyang replied, Master once mentioned that he is from the same generation as Master. Jiao Yuanliang was instantly motivated. He flipped over and sat up. What is his name? LV Junyang looked over and said, Junior Martial Brother doesn't need to ask anymore. If you have the time, you might as well focus on cultivating. Jiao Yuanliang felt bored and drank another mouthful of wine. He thought to himself, I don't know how my disciples are doing. That spiritual master Zhou who came here last time said he was willing to help, but after all he was just a nodding acquaintance. He might not have said it out of politeness. Just as he was thinking, his expression changed. He turned around and saw a waterfall rushing down, crashing into a stone drum below the stone platform. Instantly, the sound of the air shaking rang out. His eyes widened and he said, There's a visitor outside. He suddenly stood up and said, I don't know who has come here. Senior Martial Brother, stay here. I will go out and take a look. LV Junyang said, Junior Martial Brother, be careful. Jiao Yuanliang smiled and said, Didn't Senior Martial Brother say that there are no outside enemies here? If the visitor really has bad intentions, I can't ask for more. I can fight and stretch my muscles. He flew out and soon arrived at the door. He opened the stone and saw a tall and handsome young Taoist standing in front of the door. He looked up and down and couldn't help but say in surprise, Spiritual Master Zhou. Zhou Xian smiled and bowed, Greetings, Taoist Jiao. Jiao Yuanliang quickly returned the greeting and said, The 9 nether cold wind is outside. Taoist Zhou, please come in for a chat. Zhou Xian was a disciple of Qi Yintian. According to seniority, Zhou Xian was 2 generations higher than him. However, he naturally wouldn't take this seriously and only treated him as an equal. Zhou Xian didn't stand on ceremony and followed him in after saying that he had disturbed him. When they returned to the cave hall, Zhou Xian saw LV Junyang and took the initiative to bow, Spiritual Master Lu. LV Junyang's expression was indifferent and he only nodded at him. Jiao Yuanliang smiled and said, This senior martial brother of mine only cares about Tao. Other than cultivation, he doesn't care about anything else. Don't blame him, Taoist Zhou. Zhou Xian hurriedly said, You're too kind. Jiao Yuanliang invited him to sit down and took out a wine set. He poured 2 cups of wine and said, I don't have anything good to serve here, so I can only treat you with wine. Zhou Xian smiled and said, I know that this place is poor, so I specially brought delicious food here. With a wave of his sleeve, a stream of clear water gushed out, flowing gently. It looked as if it had been carefully cut, only 3 feet wide, not the slightest bit overflowing. After making a few turns on the rock, the stream of water flowed out of it. Many delicious dishes were carried by the lotus leaves and floated out. It circled around in the stream, and in an instant, the entire room was filled with a fragrant aroma. Jiao Yuanliang heard a splash and several carps jumped out, carrying a plate of delicious food in front of him. He couldn't help but smile, interesting. He was about to raise his chopsticks. Zhou Xian reached out to stop him. He smiled and said, Slow down, there's no need for you to do it yourself. He took out a scroll and opened it with both hands. With a light shake, numerous beautiful girls walked down from the scroll. They laughed and talked, fragrance wafted around them. They fought to serve wine and tea to the 2 of them, massaging their shoulders and legs. There were even some who went outside to sing and dance, playing flutes and zither. Jiao Yuanliang let out a loud laugh. He raised his cup and said, Brother Zhou, I'm indebted to you. We don't know anyone in the sect, so we're like prisoners guarding this small world. Thank you for coming to visit us. Zhou Xian raised his cup and drank, smiling, Taoist Jiao is too polite. When he put it down, he seemed to remember something and smacked his forehead. I nearly forgot. Previously, I was entrusted by fellow Taoist Jiao, so I personally went to the Central Pillar continent and found a few of your disciples. Everything is fine and they are currently cultivating on my island. When Jiao Yuanliang heard that, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. When he was cultivating under Yan Changsheng, he had offended many Middle Pillar cultivators. Now that his master wasn't here and he left his disciples behind, he was afraid that they would take revenge on him. However, after entering Qinsang's school and knowing that there were enemies here, he didn't even dare to send a letter back. Now that he knew that everything was fine, he was relieved. He put on a serious expression and cupped his hands. Thank you, Taoist Zhou, please accept my bow. Zhou Xian quickly went forward to support him, saying, we hit it off the moment we met and saw each other as friends, so there's no need to be so courteous. Jiao Yuanliang laughed and said, you're right. Come, let's drink. The two drank for the whole night. When they were done, Zhou Xian kept the scroll and said in a deep voice, before I came here today, I heard about something. I hope the two of you can be prepared. Jiao Yuanliang was shocked when he saw how serious he was. He sat up straight and said, what happened? LV Juanyang's expression didn't change, he just looked at him. Zhou Xian said, the two of you should know that the demon's cave will appear in a few years. Jiao Yuanliang said, I heard about it when I was in Middle Pillar continent. What does it have to do with us? Zhou Xian said, the top 10 disciples today is Qin Feng. He is a disciple of Qin clan. Yesterday, he went to Floating Heavenly Palace and requested for the two of you to help him in battle. I heard that the sect master has already agreed. Jiao Yuanliang was startled at first, then he stood up and said excitedly, there's such a thing. Does that mean we can go out? He had been trapped here for 10 years. Although the small cold world was vast, it was covered with cold wind and snow. It was extremely cold, and to him, it was like a prison. If he could get out, he would be willing to fight with the disciples of the devil's doctrine. Zhou Xian shook his head and sighed, Brother Jiao, don't be careless. I heard that the reason why the two of you are needed is to deal with a third-stage cultivator from the Netherworld Spring sect. This is a malicious move. LV Junyang put down the bamboo scroll in his hand and said, I have seen a few people of this generation from the Netherworld Spring sect. I wonder who it is. Zhou Xian said, this person is called Lu Rongyang. Have you heard of her? LV Junyang nodded and didn't ask any more questions. He still held the bamboo scroll in his hand and read it carefully. Zhou Xian looked at the two of them and said, it's better for the two of you to be careful. I have been out for a night. I still have some matters to attend to, so I will take my leave now. Jiao Yuanliang said, let me send you off. Zhou Xian hurriedly said a few polite words. After he came out of the little cold world, he thought to himself, that spiritual master LV is indeed extraordinary. I only hope that today's favor will be useful in the future. He put in so much effort because he was optimistic that LV Junyang could become a cave in the future. If he did good to LV Junyang now, when his disciples fought for the position of the top 10 disciples in the future, he might be able to get LV Junyang's help. He looked back and shouted. Then, he turned into a ray of spiritual light and went back to the cave residence smugly. Chapter 956. The Fengling Ocean was located far away from the South Sea. There were as many islands and continents as there were stars in the sky. Although it was far away from Donghua and the other 3 continents, since ancient times, many cultivators came here to avoid disasters and passed down their teachings. For tens of thousands of years, some sects in the South Cliffs continent fled here under the suppression of the Yuxiao school and rebuilt their sections. Hence, it could be considered a place of cultivation. 2,000 years ago, a talented person appeared on the ocean. This person borrowed the legacy of his predecessors and cultivated a grotto heaven with the help of a cinnabar candle king bug. Then, he used more than 100 years to merge the various sects in the Fengling Ocean into one. He established a sect, spread the teachings and recruited guests. At that time, it was so powerful that it became the #1 sect on the ocean. This person never forgot to take back the original sect in the South Cliffs continent. Hence, when the treasure in the Yuxiao school was lent out, he led his people to kill his way back to the South Cliffs continent. Relying on the primordial exotic insect, he was unstoppable in the beginning, but he provoked Lord Lingya to personally make a move. After a battle, he was defeated and died. More than half of his disciples were also killed by Jade Sky sect, and the rest fled back in panic. After such a setback, the Fengling Ocean was unable to recover. The original sect also scattered and never regained its former glory. Today, there was a flying boat on the Fengling Ocean. 2 people stood on it. The one in front was a Taoist in his 40s. He held a horsetail whisk and wore a black robe. He wore a crown and a beard. He looked elegant. The person behind him seemed to be his disciple. His eyes were moving and his limbs were slender. He looked like a quick-witted person. The flying boat arrived on an island. However, he waved his hand and said, "Disciple, stop." The disciple quickly shook the talisman in his hand and stopped the flying boat. Then, he looked left and right and said, "Master, is this the place?" The middle-aged Taoist grunted and took out a bronze bell from his sleeve. He shook it gently. About a quarter of an hour later, a whirlpool suddenly appeared in the sea. A cultivator riding a white-finned whitefish flew out from the whirlpool and approached the 2 of them. With a scrutinizing gaze, he asked, "Were you the ones who shook the palace-shaking bell?" The middle-aged Taoist put away the bronze bell. He cupped his hands and said, "That's right, the cultivator asked casually, "What do you want?" The middle-aged Taoist said, "I wish to enter the Fengling Ocean to meet an old friend." The cultivator sneered and said, "Avoiding disaster means avoiding disaster. Is there a need for such excuses?" The middle-aged Taoist didn't do anything, but his disciple couldn't take it anymore and was about to scold him, but was stopped by his master. "I have an old friendship with Frost Maple Island's Island Master. Please make an exception." Frost Maple Island. That cultivator's expression changed slightly. Back then, that Heavenly Passage's human sect had 2 disciples, one was Yuhengshan. It was rumored that after his master died, his whereabouts were unknown. The other person, Wen Rao, was the founder of the Frost Maple Island sect. He looked at the 2 of them again and asked in a gentler tone, "Do you have a token?" The middle-aged Taoist took out a jade pendant shaped like a maple leaf and held it in his palm, allowing him to look at it. The cultivator stretched out his hand and wanted to take it, but the middle-aged Taoist flipped his hand and put it away. He smiled and said, "If you don't believe me, you can ask Island Master Wang to come out." He waved his horsetail whisk, and the disciple next to him took out a bottle of pills unwillingly and tossed it over. The cultivator caught it and smelled it in front of the 2 of them. He nodded in satisfaction and put it away. Then, he waved his sleeves and shouted, "Just wait." Saying so, he controlled the flying fish and dove back into the ocean. The disciple gritted his teeth and scolded, "He's just a mystic light realm cultivator, and he dares to be so rude to master. If it was somewhere else, I'd definitely teach him a lesson." The middle-aged Taoist was very calm and said, "The cultivators of the Fengling Ocean have always been like this. They're arrogant and look down on everyone. It's nothing strange. Just bear with it for now." The disciple was still indignant and said, "Master, is there nowhere else to go other than this place?" The middle-aged Taoist sighed and said, "My clan was harmed by the Qinsang school in the past. Now, I heard that there are 2 more grotto heavens in the clan, and they are the enemies who destroyed my clan, so we can't go back to the 4 continents of the East Flower continent. As for the Dongshan continent, there's the Python tribe there, so it's not appropriate. In the entire world, this is the only place where we can establish ourselves." His name was Suihua. Hundreds of years ago, when the Qinsang school destroyed the Su clan, 5 Yuanian cultivators in the clan used their bodies as swords to break through the restrictions and move the formation of the underwater manor. That was how he managed to escape. However, when the dragon manor fell, it was not on land, but in the depths of the sea. Although he managed to avoid the disaster, it was difficult for him to come out. Fortunately, the Su clan had the intention to establish their own clan long ago, and the treasured materials and pills left behind were enough to support his cultivation. His talent was not bad, and he managed to cultivate to the Yuanying realm in 300 years, which was why he was able to leave the manor. However, in these hundreds of years, he was afraid that the Qinsang school would find him, so he carefully traveled on the sea and did not dare to go near the East Flower continent. Although there are many clans on the Fengling Ocean, they are like a plate of loose sand. If there's a strong person who imitated the actions of that Jinren in the past, it would not be difficult to unify them. In another few decades, I have the hope of breaking into the third stage realm. I originally wanted to come here again at that time, but it's a pity. At this point, Suihua could not help but shake his head. The disciple lowered his head, clenched his fists, and said, I have implicated you, master. If I did not leak the technique, how would I be targeted by the carp tribe? Suihua comforted him, this cannot be blamed on you. I have also been careless. I did not expect that other than the Qinsang school, even the carp tribe and the python tribe are searching for the whereabouts of the dragon manor. With the techniques and pills left behind by the Su clan, he knew that it would not be difficult for him to cultivate to the third stage realm. However, if he wanted to rebuild his clan, he needed the Grotto Heaven. However, if he wanted to peek into this realm, he did not have the Spirit Cave, and he also needed the help of Pill Jade. Even though the Su clan left behind a lot of them, they were still lacking a lot. He could only search everywhere, but he did not expect that a moment of carelessness would cause the carp tribe to discover his tracks. The disciple raised his head and wanted to say something, but he was stopped by a hand. Someone is coming. There's no need to say anything. Let's act according to the situation later. As soon as he finished speaking, the seawater below parted, and a whale demon that was more than 300 feet long popped its head out. There was a soft cushion on its back, jade curtains, and golden pearls. The silhouette of a person inside was hazy, but he could vaguely make out that it was a woman. The curtain was lifted, and a fragrant breeze blew past. A beautiful woman wearing a light yellow gown came out. Her red lips were a little bit, and she smiled sweetly. She bowed to the two people and said, Is this spiritual master Hua Xen? After my master received the letter from my master, he ordered me to welcome you outside. Suihua stroked his beard and nodded. He said, Thank you, martial niece. How should I address you? The woman said, Thank you for asking. My name is Wang Yinling, and I am my master's 8th disciple. The disciple beside Suihua snorted. He knew that his master had once saved the life of the Frost Leaf Island master. Today, they came here to see each other. Even if he did not come out to welcome them personally, he should not have sent only one disciple. Wang Yinling's beautiful eyes drifted over, and she said, This little Taoist is spiritual master's disciple, right? Suihua laughed and said, This is my disciple. His Taoist name is Xingjiang. Wang Yinling stared at him for a while. She said, Taoist brother Xingjiang's cultivation base is really amazing. I'm afraid you have already reached the core transformation realm. If I have time, I will definitely ask for your help. Xingjiang did not wait for her reply. However, Suihua coughed. He could only force a grunt. That was a yes. Wang Yinling smiled and reminded him, the fierce winds on the Fengling Ocean are endless, and if there is no one familiar with the situation to guide us, it will be extremely difficult to enter smoothly. This place is fine, but after we pass through the sea valley, the two of you must follow closely. If you get separated, I'm afraid only the Grotto Heaven's people can save you. Suihua also knew that there were fierce winds outside the Fengling Ocean. Even Yuanying cultivators could only last for 2 to 4 hours if they were caught in it. Therefore, there was a need to pay attention to when to enter and where to go. It was also because of this that the sects in the sea were not annihilated by the Yuxiao school back then. He said, Then I will have to trouble Marshal Niece Wang. Wang Yinling giggled and said, Reverend, you're too kind. She waved her hand, parted the seawater, and led the way into the depths of the sea. Sui Hua also drove the flying boat and went in. Soon, the water returned to normal, and the sea became calm again. Not long after the two of them went in, the atmosphere flashed, and two Taoists appeared out of nowhere. They looked like sages, but there was a faint demonic aura around them. One of the white-haired Taoists said with a gloomy face, he actually hid in the Fengling Ocean. This is not easy to deal with. The person beside him said, Senior Marshal Brother, should we chase after him? The white-haired Taoist shook his head and said, we can't pass that fierce wind barrier, so it will be difficult for us to follow him. The other person said anxiously, Senior Marshal Brother, what should we do now? The white-haired Taoist said, since he is here, we won't be afraid of him running away. Let's go back and report to the ancestor first. With the ancestor's cultivation base, it will be a piece of cake for him to break this place. The two of them discussed in low voices for a while, and a black wind rose, and they disappeared in an instant. A few hours later, Sui Hua and his disciple had passed through the Sea Valley and arrived at a Shanyu manor. There were many cultivators coming and going here. Wang Yinling said, please rest here for a day, it won't be too late to pass the wind barrier tomorrow. Zheng Jiang said in surprise, didn't we pass the wind barrier just now? Wang Yinling giggled and said, how is that a wind barrier? It's just a whirlpool. Forget it, I won't say much, Taoist brother will know how powerful it is tomorrow. Sui Hua said, a guest should follow the host's wishes. Marshal nephew Wang said to wait for a day, so let's wait for a day. Wang Yinling said, Jinren, please rest first. It's not easy to come out, and Marshal nephew still has some private matters to attend to. I believe Jinren won't mind, right? Sui Hua smiled and said, Marshal nephew can go. Wang Yinling was delighted, and she bowed to the two of them before leaving. Sui Hua was about to go to the lodging, but he saw a handsome Taoist opposite him. The Taoist smiled at him and cupped his hands. His brows furrowed imperceptibly, and he returned the greeting. He then called out to Zheng Jiang, and in a few steps, he entered the guest house that Wang Yinling had arranged for him. After sitting down, he said, put up the restriction. Zheng Jiang did as he was told, and he turned around and said, Teacher, is there something wrong? Sui Hua's face was a little gloomy, and he said, not good, just now, did you see the Taoist outside? Zheng Jiang said, I saw him, does teacher know him? Sui Hua said, I saw him a few times on the sea, he's a disciple of Yuxiao School's Zhou family, I think he's called Zhou Zishang, but I don't know why he's here. Zheng Jiang was surprised, and he said, doesn't Yuxiao School have enmity with the sects of Fengling Ocean? Sui Hua shook his head, and said, times have changed. He was a little worried, afraid that the other party was also here for the long residence. It would be fine if they were targeted by the Carp tribe, but if they were targeted by Yuxiao School, it would be difficult for them to escape. Chapter 957. Sui Hua had been hiding for hundreds of years. He was always on guard against anyone who could threaten him, let alone a giant like Yuxiao. No matter how he thought about it, he still felt uneasy. Thereupon he called his disciple Zheng Jiang over and asked him to find out a thing or two. When it was daybreak, Zheng Jiang returned and reported, Teacher, I heard that Zhou Zishang and the palace mistress of Chan Palace have a close personal friendship. This time, I accepted her invitation and went to admire the flowers. Sui Hua said in a low voice, in that case, it was only a coincidence that we ran into this person. Zheng Jiang said, this disciple thinks so. Sui Hua nodded and said, I hope master is worrying too much. No matter what, as long as they entered the Fengling Ocean, no matter if it was the Carp tribe, the Python tribe, or the Yuxiao tribe, they would not be able to help. Unless the people from those grotto heavens personally acted. However, if they really made such a big fuss, it would be a clear message to others that there was something wrong with this place. As such, they would definitely not do such a thing. At most, they would send their disciples over. With the few magical treasures in his hands, even if a third-stage cultivator came over, he would be able to contend with them for a while, so he wasn't afraid. Thinking of this, he felt slightly at ease. Around noon, when Yinling returned to the guest house. Her face was glowing as if she had taken some miraculous medicine. Her internal energy seemed to have improved compared to yesterday. After seeing the two of them, she bowed and said, "Taoist master, the wind barrier is already weak. We can leave in 2 hours. If Taoist master has something to do, we can leave another day. Grow. Wind. If you miss it today, you'll have to wait for another 3 days." Zheng Jiang's eyes lit up as he asked anxiously, "Today is the middle of the moon. Could it be that this is the best time to cross the wind barrier?" Wang Yinling glanced at him. How can it be so simple? The wind from the wind barrier comes from the wind caves, and the wind caves are spread all over the Fengling Ocean. There are at most tens of thousands of them, and at least 1,000 of them. They are entangled and colliding with each other, life and death are uncertain, and there are no rules to follow. Sui Hua stroked his beard and said, "Rumor has it that every cultivator in the Fengling Ocean knows a technique that allows them to see the changes in the eye of the storm. Is that true?" Wang Yinling laughed and said, "There is indeed such a technique, but not everyone is proficient in it. Only the sect leaders of the various families had grievances. Furthermore, entering and exiting the wind formation doesn't just rely on cultivation techniques, there are other methods as well." Sui Hua nodded slowly, knowing that she was not lying. The cultivators of the Fengling Ocean relied on the fierce wind barrier to ward off enemies. This involved the secrets of life and death. He wouldn't let outsiders know about it easily. However, at this moment, he still wanted to explore the secrets within. He waved his horsetail whisk and said, "If that's the case, we'll follow Marshal Nephew." Wang Yinling chuckled and said, "Please follow me." She turned and walked out of the courtyard. When he was outside the guest house, he looked back and smiled. Then, he soared into the sky. Sui Hua and his disciple also followed on clouds. After dozens of breaths, they arrived at the southeast corner of the Shanyu underwater residence. There was a high platform there that seemed to be carved out of a flat mountain peak. A huge ship was suspended on it. It was 3,000 feet long and had over 100 floors. It looked like a city or a mountain that was too high to climb. Wang Yinling was slightly proud of herself and said, "Venerable, please take a look. This is the Danning Spirit Manifestation Great Cloud Ship. Among the hundreds of sects in the Fengling Ocean, only 3 have such a ship. We can ride on this ship and borrow the momentum of the fierce wind. We only need 1 night to return to the Frost Maple sect." Sui Hua looked over and said, "Such a large ship probably needs the earth fire heavenly furnace to refine." Wang Yinling praised, "Venerable has a good eye. This ship was refined from the earth fire heavenly furnace created by the founding master. However, after the founding master, the descendants of the heavenly furnace were unable to maintain it, so it gradually fell into disuse." When she said that, her tone was full of pity. At this moment, an old man with a solemn expression came to her side. She hurriedly bowed and said, "Greetings, Marshal Uncle Xia." That old man nodded and turned to Sui Hua and his disciple. He said coldly, "If the 2 of you have nothing else to do, please return to the cabin and rest. When we arrive, I will send someone to call for you." Sui Hua smiled and said, "Thank you." That old man called out, and a maid came over to lead the way. The 2 of them returned to the cabin. After sitting down, Zheng Jiang said angrily, "Teacher, I didn't expect the disciples of the Frost Maple Island Lord to be so arrogant and not put us in their eyes. Doesn't teacher have a friendship with Tongwei cult? Why don't we go there?" Sui Hua's gaze was deep as he said, "Fengling High cultivators are cold by nature. It's the same no matter where we go. Besides, we have no choice but to go to Frost Maple Island." Zheng Jiang was puzzled. "Why is that?" Sui Hua pondered for a moment and said, "Since we're here, it's time to tell you about this." He waved his hand, and a spiritual light enveloped the 2 of them, isolating them from the outside world. Then, he used a secret technique to transmit his voice. Back then, the reason why that spiritual master on the Fengling Ocean was able to form a cave was because he obtained a small world from a predecessor. After the civil strife in Qinsong, our Su clan tried to find a way out and tried to find a few small worlds. Let's not talk about the others, but this small world is very likely to be near Frost Maple Island. Speaking up to this point, his eyes flashed. That spiritual master was able to fight with Lingya on the East Flower Continent, so he obviously has a lot of core jade in his hands. I suspect that it's hidden inside. This time, we can take this opportunity to find out. Disciple, a little impatience will spoil the great plan. If we can find this place, not only can we avoid the spying of our enemies, we can also find a way to move the true dragon mansion here. At that time, our Su clan will be able to rise again. Yuxiao School, Moving Star Palace. Wu Fenggu expressionlessly sat on the high seat, reading a letter. After a while, he raised his head and said, "Is this true?" The Confucian-robed cultivator said, "The person who sent the letter was a spy that our clan planted many years ago. This time, he risked his life to inform the clan, so it should be true." Wu Fenggu said in a deep voice, "Who else knows about this?" The Confucian-robed cultivator said, "After I received the news, I immediately came to find senior brother." Wu Fenggu looked outside the hall and said, "The Azure Dragon's remains are rumored to be somewhat magical. If we obtain the true dragon mansion, we might be able to use it to enter the cave." Zhou Zi didn't immediately report to the clan, but instead concealed this matter. It seems that he wants to enjoy it alone. The Confucian-robed cultivator suddenly stood up, his eyes burning with excitement. He said, "This opportunity cannot be missed, it will not come again. Senior brother, if you obtain this opportunity and use it to enter the cave, our clan will be able to recover some of its decline." The Zhou clan was originally the direct descendant of the clan's founder, Yao Han. For more than 10,000 years, they were the top clans in the clan. Since then, when Master Lingya took over, their power grew. In just a few hundred years, 2 people had entered the cave. On the other hand, the Wu clan had outstanding talents among their younger generation, but they were all suppressed. The clan's 3 heavenly abodes had been in seclusion for hundreds of years, ignoring the outside world. Everyone in the clan was very worried. If this continued, the Wu clan would become like the Xia clan, becoming a vassal of the Zhou clan. The item that could be used to enter the cave was placed in front of Wu Fenggu, and it was not a small temptation. He couldn't help but fall into deep thought, considering the pros and cons. The Confucian-robed cultivator looked at him from below, not daring to disturb him. After a long time, Wu Fenggu finally said, "This matter is indeed not good to let the Zhou clan take advantage of it. Fortunately, the sect does not know of this matter, so there is still room to intervene." The Confucian-robed cultivator excitedly said, "Senior brother, are you going to personally take action?" Wu Fenggu was very calm. He waved his hand and said, "Not so. I will patiently wait for another 10 years, then I can go to the spirit cave to cultivate. There is no need to take this risk at this time. Moreover, I believe that Zhou Zishang has a backup plan. It is absolutely impossible for him to snatch the dragon manor like this." The Confucian-robed cultivator couldn't help but be disappointed. He said, "Then what does senior brother want to do?" Wu Fenggu casually said, "It is not a problem. Since ancient times, it is not easy to accomplish things, but it is not difficult to ruin things. You just need to find a way to leak this information to the Qinsong school. There is no need to worry about the rest." The Confucian-robed cultivator immediately understood. He said, "Senior brother, good plan. I will do it now." However, a few days later, the news of the Su clan's remnants appearing in the South Sea was spread to the table of Chenfeng, one of the 10 first seats of the Qinsong school. Because the matter was too big, he felt that it was difficult to deal with it. Moreover, he really had to focus on dealing with the devil sect, so he personally went to the floating heavenly palace and reported the matter to the sect master. Half a day later, Wei Zihong, who was still cultivating in the clear nether heavenly lake, received a flying letter. After reading it carefully, he took out a talisman, placed it on the incense table, and silently prayed. After a while, the talisman disappeared. He bowed a few more times, then took a few precious treasures and left the residence, heading straight to the South Sea. Outside the 9 heavens, Zhang Yan sat cross-legged on a mass of chaotic xian qi, wandering in the vast void. Because he did not use external objects to fly, there was xian qi that tried to invade him at every moment. However, as soon as it came into contact with the xian qi around him, it kept melting away. After an unknown period of time, he felt that there was some obstruction between the circulation of essence qi and dharma power. He summoned the moon-crossing boat, went inside to absorb the core jade, and meditated. About half a month later, he was full of energy again. He silently observed, and his dharma power grew slightly. He nodded subconsciously. After seizing the devil form, he left the large volume cauldron and went deep into the void. On one hand, he was looking for suitable treasures, and on the other hand, he was using the xian qi to temper his body. Because of that, it was like fighting with others every day, so the growth of his dharma power was much faster than sitting in the cave and cultivating. Fortunately, he was the Duzhen Hall master of one of the 3 upper halls of Qinsang School. He had the support of a large number of core jade. Even if he had a treasure that could cross the void, it was impossible for him to use this method to cultivate. After flying for a few days, he suddenly saw a large cluster of star gravel that looked like a jade belt, floating over. He had seen many of these things on his way here earlier, so he wasn't surprised at all. However, at this moment, he noticed that there was a large piece of rock among them that actually gave him a familiar feeling. His eyes flashed, and he was about to go over to take a look. However, at this moment, his mind moved. With a look, he knew that it was a talisman that was previously given to his disciples. After he formed his own cave, he gave each of his disciples a talisman that contained a bit of his heart's blood. If they encountered a big matter, as long as they held the talisman and chanted his name, or burned incense and prayed, they would be able to transmit their God's will, allowing him to sense it. He pondered for a while. That strand of God's will was peaceful, so it was not an urgent matter. There must be another reason for the message. After thinking about it, he smiled and shook his sleeves. In an instant, an item flew out, and with the speed of light, it fell towards the 9 continents. Chapter 958. Sui Hua and his disciples spent the night on the boat. On the morning of the 2nd day, they arrived at Frost Maple Island. They wanted to pay their respects to the island master Weng Rao, but they heard that he had gone to the Chan Palace Flower Festival and would only be back after a few days. Thus, they could only wait at the inn at the foot of the mountain. After Wen Yinling brought the 2 of them to the island, she was considered to have completed her task. She gave them a few words and disappeared. For 7 days, nobody bothered about the 2 of them. Until half a month later, when Weng Rao returned from the flower festival, he summoned Sui Hua to meet him. Even though this person seemed to be very courteous to him on the surface, he actually revealed a faint sense of alienation. Moreover, this person had hinted repeatedly in secret that he shouldn't tell anyone about how he'd saved him all those years ago. Sui Hua had expected this and took the initiative to ask for a quiet place to cultivate without disturbing others. He did not dare to ask for too much. Weng Rao was satisfied with his adaptability and sent him to a place called Scattered Valley Island to cultivate. When the 2 of them arrived at Scattered Valley Island the next day, they realized that the place was barren and gravel with only a few weeds. Moreover, the spiritual vigor was scattered. It was definitely not a good place to cultivate. Zheng Jiang scoffed and said angrily, "Teacher, you're right. Weng Rao is indeed a mean and ungrateful person. He didn't think that if it wasn't for teacher, he would have died in East Sea. How could he be so carefree now?" Sui Hua chuckled and said, "Although I'm here to avoid trouble, I'm also looking for that small world. The colder Frost Maple Island treats me, the easier it will be." Zheng Jiang felt indignant and said, "I know that too, but I'm still angry." Sui Hua sighed. "This disciple of mine is talented, but he's too impatient and straightforward. He doesn't have any shrewdness. When his cultivation base is higher, he must let him go out to gain more experience." Zheng Jiang said, "Teacher, it's still early. Are we going to look for that small world?" Sui Hua waved his hand and said, "There's no rush." He took out 3 sticks of incense and shook them gently in his hand. A wisp of smoke rose in spirals. Up above. Seeing the vague outline of a cloud appear in the empty sky, he looked at it a few times, and a cold smile appeared on his face. Someone is using the far-sighted mirror technique to observe us. The all-seeing mirror technique. He was borrowing the appearance of the clouds. Using the clouds as a mirror, those with profound cultivation could see every blade of grass and every tree within 100 miles. Everything was under his watch. Zhengjiang exclaimed, "Teacher, could it be that Frost Maple Island is up to no good?" Sui Hua shook his head and said, "Wen Rao was still worried when we first arrived here, so he sent someone to keep an eye on us. But since we are already here, there is no need to rush. I expect that he will leave after a while." In the next half a month, he only meditated in seclusion every day. Occasionally, he would go out and capture some small demons to be his servants. When he came back today, he raised the incense stick to take a look, but found that the big cloud in the sky had already disappeared. Knowing that it had left, he was instantly in a good mood. Although this was a deserted island, looking at it now, the blue seawater was boundless, and it gave off a feeling of boundless sea and sky. He waited patiently for a few more days. Seeing that the other party didn't return, he was finally at ease. He handed the cave to the small demons to take care of, and brought Zhengjiang to look around. Although there were hundreds of sects in Fengling Ocean, there were only 3 that were the most powerful. The people in charge of the sects were all Yuanying cultivators, and Frost Maple Island was one of them. Therefore, the sea it occupied was extremely vast, and there were countless islands and reefs. Everywhere he went, he took out a talisman and cast a spell to see if there was any response. This talisman was also exchanged from a disciple of Yuheng Mountain at a high price. It was the key to finding a small world. After about 3 days, he arrived at a small island with a dense stone forest. Just as he was about to take a closer look, he suddenly felt the talisman in his sleeve tremble. Just now, he took it out, and with a swoosh, it turned into a golden light and flew away. Sui Hua was not surprised, but happy instead. He pulled his disciple and chased after it with his escape technique. He saw the golden light reach a stone pillar that was 30 feet tall, cast it down, and disappeared. He landed and walked a few rounds in front of the stone pillar. After confirming that there were no restrictions, he lightly blew out a breath of clear air, and the stone pillar collapsed with a rumble. He waved his horsetail whisk, and the dust rolled away, revealing a hole in the ground. Suppressing the excitement in his heart, he said, "It should be here." Zhengjiang said, "Master, please wait for a moment. Disciple will go and scout first." Sui Hua grabbed him and said, "No need. We don't know if there are formations inside. You wait here, Master will go down and take a look." He leaped down and landed 10 feet below. He saw that he was in an underground palace. At a glance, there were countless passageways, but he didn't know which one was the right one. However, he had a way. He took out a jade crane from his sleeve and tossed it into the sky. The crane fluttered its wings and flew up. After circling 1 round, it let out a long cry and flew towards a passageway on the left. Sui Hua smiled and followed the flying crane for 2 hours. Suddenly, he fell to the ground and didn't move anymore. He knew that he had reached his destination. He raised his head and saw that in front of him was a big hall with cloud walls and silver stairs. In the middle, there were 2 spell altars. Behind it was a 30 feet tall stone mirror, polished to the point that one could see the reflection. His gaze turned and saw that the talisman had landed on the spell altar on the left. Immediately, a look of joy appeared on his face. He floated over and picked up the talisman. Immediately, he channeled his mana into it. Then, he saw the surface of the stone mirror ripple like the surface of water rippling. He was even more delighted when he saw this. How could he not know that the door was here? He immediately circulated his mana. However, after 10 minutes, the ripples gradually disappeared. No matter how much he tried, there was no movement. His face darkened and he frowned. This place is indeed not bad. After thinking for a while, he looked at the spell altar in front of him and thought, could it be that I want 2 talismans? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it made sense. That Jinren had 2 disciples. Since this talisman was obtained from a disciple of Yuheng Mountain, then the other half is most likely in the hands of a descendant of the Wang family. However, if that's the case, it's a little difficult. This kind of item passed down by the patriarch will definitely be held in high esteem. It's impossible to obtain it using ordinary methods. Could it be that I have to resort to robbery? After thinking for a while, he felt that he could only go back and slowly think of a way. Thus, he picked up the talisman and went back the way he came. Xingjiang said, Teacher. Suihua waved his hand and said, it's not convenient to talk here. Let's talk when we get back. Xingjiang could see that his teacher was in a bad mood, so he didn't dare to ask any more and hurriedly said yes. The 2 of them flew for half a day and returned to Scattered Valley Island. However, just now when they landed, they saw a golden flying ship coming from afar. Xingjiang instantly became nervous and said, Teacher, did we reveal some flaws? Did Frost Maple Island come to punish us? Suihua was very calm and comforted him, don't panic. There are only 2 or 3 people on that ship. We're very careful. Frost Maple Island wouldn't know about it. Even if they knew, why would they only send these people? Only then did Xingjiang feel relieved. The flying ship arrived on the island. A handsome young cultivator floated down from the ship and landed in front of the cave abode. Zhou Zishang. Suihua's heart trembled when he saw this person. He quickly thought, what is he doing here? Zhou Zishang walked over with a slight smile on his face. He walked up and cupped his hands, saying, I've been a guest on Frost Maple Island for the past few days. I heard that master is also here, so I came to visit you. Suihua returned the greeting and said, Fellow Taoist, you look a little familiar. How do you know me? Zhou Zishang looked straight into his eyes and said, Master Su doesn't know me, but I do. Suihua pretended to be surprised and took a few steps back. He said, I'm Hua Xin. I don't know who Master Su is. I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone else. Zhou Zishang glanced at him and said with a playful smile, Fellow Taoist, you don't need to hide. Since I'm here, I already know who you are. Suihua's heart sank, but killing intent appeared in his eyes. Zhou Zishang didn't seem to care at all. He smiled and said, Master Su, don't panic. I'm your friend, not your enemy. I don't have any ill intentions. I only came here today to say one thing. Suihua stared at him and said slowly, Please speak, fellow Taoist. Zhou Zishang smiled and said, Qinsang's school can't accommodate Master Su, but Yu Xiao can. It's up to fellow Taoist to choose. He took off a jade pendant and tossed it over. He said, I'll be a guest on Frost Maple Island for the next few days. I won't be leaving anytime soon. Fellow Taoist can come and find me anytime. After that, he cupped his hands again and smiled. Without any hesitation, he boarded the flying ship and left the island. Xingjiang watched as the flying ship gradually disappeared into the distance. He said, Master, can his words be trusted? Suihua said coldly, so what if it's true? So what if it's false? If I really enter Yuxiao school, my life and death will be in my own hands. Not to mention that he didn't believe Zhou Zishang's words, even if he really wanted to recruit him into Yuxiao school, he wouldn't agree. Back then, Master Su could become one of the 5 great clans of Qinsang school because he had the support of the heavenly abode. Now, he was alone without any roots or foundation. With the Dragon Manor, it was like a child holding gold in a busy market. Even if he entered Yuxiao school, the other party could find a reason to kill him at any time. At that time, the true Dragon Manor would naturally belong to Yuxiao school. However, since the other party already knew his identity, if he didn't agree, he would definitely use forceful methods. He pondered for a long time, but a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. Since that was the case, he might as well make use of it to avoid this disaster. After Wei Zihong left Qinsang School, he went to the South Sea. However, because in a few years, it would be the time when the Devil's Cave would appear. Cultivators from small sects that depended on Yuxiao could be seen everywhere in the southeast continent. Just like in the north, all the places with spiritual mountains and beautiful waters had restrictions and altars. If he went straight there, he would definitely be discovered. Therefore, he could only go around in secret. However, after reaching the sea, the further south he went, the more he felt that Yuxiao was powerful. Almost every island had cultivators patrolling around it. When he passed by the southern cliff continent, he could see floating rafts and flying boats in the sky from afar. They were so densely packed that they almost covered the sky and the sun. He was also secretly shocked. Out of caution, he also stayed far away. Half a month later, he was already in front of the Fengling Ocean. Chapter 959. Wei Zihong looked at the distant sky from the sea. He could faintly see a void chi moving back and forth on the surface of the sea. He didn't know how many tens of thousands of miles it was. He knew that this should be the famous severe wind barrier. Rumor has it that if a normal cultivator was blown by this wind, their bones and flesh would immediately turn into mud, nothing would be left. Even if a Yuanying cultivator like him entered the inner room, he could at most last 100 breaths. He didn't have the intention to go up and try, but ever since the cultivators in the Fengling Ocean lost to the Yuxiao 2,000 years ago, they completely gave up on the idea of returning to the southern cliffs continent. Since then, they closed their doors and rarely interacted with the cultivators of the outside world. If they wanted to enter, they usually needed someone to receive them. Fortunately, he had inquired about it beforehand. This place was after all only a corner of the 9 continents. A lot of external items needed to be collected from the outside world. There were flying boats coming and going every day, so he wasn't in a hurry. He took out a concealment magic treasure, turned into a long smoke and circled around his body, and hid himself, ready to hitch a ride on the boat when someone came and went. After waiting in the sky for less than half a day, he saw a sea boat coming over. He used his mana and immediately saw the inside and outside of the boat. There were about 500 people on the boat, most of them were servants and servants. There were only about 10 cultivators, but their cultivation level was low. Only a cultivator in embroidered robes had a cultivation level of core formation. Wei Zihong's purpose this time was to enter the sea realm, so he wasn't picky. He immediately used his mana. 3 clouds spread out, and the big boat was fixed in place. No matter how the wind and waves moved, it couldn't move forward even half an inch. The people inside the cabin felt something was wrong. They all came out of the cabin. He didn't hide his cultivation level. When the cultivators on the boat saw him, how could they not know that the other side was a Yuanying Jinren? They were instantly confused. They didn't know how they offended him. Wei Zihong looked down and said, "Who is the master here?" The cultivator in embroidered robes came out of the crowd, and said with his head lowered, "I am Li Yitong, the owner of this boat." Wei Zihong said, "Are you going to the Fengling Ocean?" Li Yitong replied, "This lowly one's boat is heading towards the Fengling Ocean." Wei Zihong nodded and said, "Then it's on the way. I'll borrow your place for a few days." Finished speaking, he shook his sleeve and walked into the cabin. Li Yitong was stunned for a moment and immediately complained in his heart. But there was nothing he could do to stop her. After thinking for a while, he called a servant over and said, "Go and prepare a room for Taoist master and call a few clever maids." The manager was extremely nervous. He said in a low voice, "Master." This place was still all right. When they arrived at Gentleman Island, the number of people boarding the boat was fixed. Then how should they pass the test? The Chan Palace is looking for our mistakes. The brocade-robed cultivator sighed and said, "Let's take it one step at a time." Wei Zihong didn't pay attention to what was happening outside. He just randomly found a cabin and sat down to meditate. After the boat traveled for 6 hours, Li Yitong's voice rang out from outside, "Taoist master, we have arrived at Gentleman Island. If we continue forward, we will need to change to a bigger boat." When Wei Zihong heard this, he got off the bed and walked out. When he looked up, he saw that he was already on an island, and when he looked further away, there were countless void cheese spiraling with great momentum. Some of the seawater was swept up into the sky, and as it flowed back and forth, it actually converged into numerous rivers in the sky. The rivers were white like dragons, and they crisscrossed the sky, traversing thousands of miles in the sky, and it was a magnificent sight. At this moment, his brow opened slightly and he looked out again. The scene he saw this time was different. He saw light flickering in the wind, lightning crisscrossing, swallowing the sun and spitting out the yin. The hurricane was like a dragon, roaring in the sky like a tribulation of wind and lightning. He retracted his gaze and sensed the surroundings. He roughly knew the situation here. This island looked relaxed, but in reality, there were restrictions everywhere and security was extremely tight. He thought that he had to be careful here. He wasn't afraid of the cultivators here, he was just afraid that they would clash and he wouldn't be able to smoothly enter the Fengling Ocean, so he said, "Lead the way." Li Yitong made a gesture and said, "Daoist master, this way please." Not long later, the two of them came to the shore of the sea. There was a giant boat moored there. Li Yitong took a look and saw that his subordinates were blocked outside and couldn't board the boat. His expression changed and he walked over, asking loudly, "What's going on?" The manager squeezed through the crowd and came over, saying with a bitter face, "Manager Zhong said that there are a few important guests on this boat and it can't take us anymore. He told us to come back next time." Li Yitong frowned, "Can't make an exception. I have 100 vats of fated soil on this boat and I'm about to send it to Palace Master. If it's delayed, he can't afford to bear the consequences." The steward could only sigh in despair. Li Yitong had no choice but to return to Wei Zihong's side and said, "Daoist master, this boat is carrying someone else. We can only leave when the next boat comes back." Wei Zihong glanced at him and said, "How long do we have to wait?" Li Yitong thought about it and said, "If we miss the wind season, we'll have to wait for another month." Wei Zihong said indifferently, "Too long." He raised his head and gathered energy in his eyes. In an instant, a spiritual light shone out and everyone on the boat became dazed. They got off the boat like walking corpses and no matter how the others shouted at them, they couldn't wake up. Li Yitong saw such a strange situation and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He pointed at one of them and said, "Daoist master, this is Manager Zhong on the boat. Without him, the boat can't move." Wei Zihong casually waved his sleeve and Manager Zhong woke up with a quiver. He looked at the 3 clouds above Wei Zihong's head and his eyes were filled with fear. "I heard that Li Yitong invited a guest. It must be this person. But why does this seem like the methods of the devil sect?" Just now, he could clearly sense his every move, but his body didn't listen to him. He clearly had Yuaniing cultivation, but in front of the other party, he didn't have the slightest ability to resist. Li Yitong stepped forward and said, "Manager Zhong, can we board the boat?" Manager Zhong went back and forth here to greet people. Whether it was knowledge or insight, he was much more knowledgeable than the cultivators who hid in the Fengling Ocean all day. He knew that the devil sect cultivators had strange temperaments and many of them would kill at the slightest provocation. They didn't come to reason with you, so he didn't dare to mention the previous matter and hurriedly said, "Okay, okay. Fellow Daoist Li, please board the boat." Li Yitong saw Manager Zhong's timid appearance and suddenly felt proud. He leaned to the side and said, "Daoist master, please board the boat." Wei Zihong waved his sleeve and went to the boat. Inside the cabin. After sitting down, not long after, he felt the boat slightly shake and knew that it had set off. From his sleeve he took out a map of the sea. Stretching out his hand, a drop of lead-silver ball appeared on the map. As the ship turned left and right, it rolled back and forth on the map, leaving a silver mark on the map. This magic treasure was called Misai Bead, and it could see the changes in the geography and heaven's secrets. He took it out now. It was to find a way to get past the severe wind barrier so that it would be convenient for him to travel in the future. After a night, at the break of dawn, the sound of the wind outside gradually subsided. He went out of the cabin. He saw that he was already on a continent. Li Yitong came over and said respectfully, Taoist master, do you have any other instructions? Wei Zihong said, just now on the boat, I heard that there is a cicada palace flower festival here. I also want to go over and take a look. Do you know how to get there? Li Yitong was surprised and happy. He said, we are here to deliver soil to the cicada palace, so it is on the way. Unfortunately, Taoist master is late. The cicada palace blooms for 4 seasons and 3 seasons have already passed. Now that we have passed, we can only see the last season. Wei Zihong said, so you are familiar with the situation here? Li Yitong immediately said, I have some face here. If Taoist master has anything, just tell me and I will do my best to do it. Wei Zihong changed his mind. He didn't know how long it would take for him to find his own family. Li Yitong seemed to be familiar with the situation here and could be used. He said, I am here to look for someone who hasn't been here for long. He is dressed like a Taoist and has Yuanying cultivation. If you help me find him, I can give you some benefits. When Li Yitong heard this, he patted his chest and said, don't worry Taoist master, there are very few outsiders on the Fengling Ocean. If it is as Taoist master said, it should be easy to find. Taoist master, please wait for a moment, I will go and give some instructions. I believe there will be news soon. Wei Zihong made an oh sound and looked at him, then I will wait. Li Yitong clasped his hands at him and went to make arrangements. This person was indeed not boasting. In just a few hours, he came back and said, Taoist master, I heard that a month ago, a master and a disciple came to Frost Maple Island. One of them is similar to what Taoist master described. Rumor has it that he has already become a guest elder of Frost Maple Island. Wei Zihong's eyes lit up and he said, where is Frost Maple Island? Li Yitong said, 3,000 miles east from here is the boundary of Frost Maple Island. Since Wei Zihong found out about the person's whereabouts, he didn't hesitate anymore. He threw a bottle of medicinal pills to Li Yitong and leaped into the sky, turning into a streak of light and flying away. On Scattered Valley Island, after Zhou Zishang left, Suihua thought about it again and finally decided to take a risk. He told his disciple to wait in the cave while he pierced through the clouds and arrived above extreme heaven. He took the jade pendant that Zhou Zishang gave him and circulated his magic power. With a sudden leap, he turned into a streak of light and flew away. After an hour, a streak of light came from afar. When it got close, the light dispersed and Zhou Zishang walked out. He looked at him and smiled, since fellow Taoist Su has come to find me, have you thought it through? Suihua didn't mention this and said, Taoist Zhou, do you know that before Taoist Shao attacked your Yuxiao boundary, he left a small world in the Fengling Ocean? Zhou Zishang was startled and said, is there such a thing? Suihua said, according to what I know, there are many good medicinal pills hidden in this small world. It's just that my cultivation is insufficient and I can't enter it. If Taoist Zhou can help me, I'll do as you said and enter Yuxiao. I'm willing to share the benefits that I've obtained here with Taoist Zhou. Zhou Zishang was immediately moved. The reason he sought out Suihua was because he wanted to take over the Long Manor. In fact, he did not report it to the sect. Now that there was another small world, he was even more surprised. He said, how can I help you? Suihua first showed him the talisman that he had and told him the whole story. In the end, he said, there's another talisman in the hands of the Weng family of Frost Maple. However, it's impossible to get Weng Rao to hand it over, so we can only snatch it. I wasn't confident at first, but if I can work together with Taoist Zhou, I'm confident. Zhou Zishang's eyes flickered and he smiled. He shook his head and said, Taoist Su, you overestimate me. Weng Rao is the leader of a sect, I'm afraid that just the two of us won't be enough to snatch it. Suihua said, then what does fellow Taoist Zhou think? Zhou Zishang smiled and said, I'm friends with the Cicada Palace Lord. If she helps, we'll have a higher chance. Suihua seemed to be hesitant and said, it's not impossible to have one more person, but, Zhou Zishang interrupted him and said, I know that Taoist Zhou has doubts. We can all sign the contract. Will Taoist Zhou be at ease then? Suihua thought about it and reluctantly agreed. However, there was a hint of mockery in his eyes. Chapter 960. Just as Wei Zihong entered the boundary of the Fengling Ocean, a person also came from the outside. He was tall, had a square face, a straight nose, and a wide forehead. However, there was a fiendish aura between his brows. This person was called Chu Shang, and he was the person with the highest cultivation in the carp tribe. His cultivation had already reached the 3rd stage. Chu Yu had come to seize the dragon manor and was afraid that others wouldn't be able to suppress Suihua, who had many treasures, so he sent him. However, when he reached the boundary of the Fengling Ocean, he was also obstructed by the wind. However, he had his own methods. He took out a talisman and muttered an incantation. Not long after, he captured over 100 water race cultivators in the sea. After asking a few questions, he understood the method of crossing the sea from a shark demon. He then turned into a wisp of smoke and entered its stomach. Borrowing its body, he swam under the sea and smoothly passed through the whirlpool. However, the wind outside was slightly weaker, so it was still easy to pass. The deeper he went, the stronger the wind became. It was impossible to pass through so easily, so he could only cross by boat. It was also because he had to avoid the disciples of Xian's sect on his way here and was delayed by a few days. This month just happened to be the time of the year where the wind was the strongest. There was not a single boat coming or going. Helpless, he could only sit outside and wait. Wei Zihong flew east according to the direction Luitong pointed out, and soon entered the boundary of Frost Maple Island. However, when he reached this place, he could clearly see that the security was much tighter than outside. There were cultivators patrolling the surface of the sea from time to time. He only knew the general direction of Scattered Valley Island. If he searched like this, he would probably encounter the cultivators of Frost Maple Island before he could even meet the other party. After thinking for a while, he saw a deserted island not far away and landed on it. When a person who looked like a disciple passed by, he stretched out his hand and grabbed him, throwing him at his feet. He asked, "Are you a cultivator here?" That disciple didn't know what had happened at first, but when he saw Wei Zihong, he immediately panicked and said, Yes, this junior is a disciple of Frost Maple Island." Wei Zihong said in a deep voice, "Recently, a guest elder came to your island, dressed like a Taoist. He also has a disciple beside him. Do you know where he lives?" The disciple said in a trembling voice, "Senior, this lowly one's position is low, I have no way of knowing about such matters." Wei Zihong asked again, "Is there anyone here who knows?" The disciple hesitated for a moment before pointing in a certain direction. He said, "Go more than 100 li from here. There was a white sandwang. He is also a guest elder of the sect, so he should know about it." Wei Zihong took a look and indeed saw a large island. Spiritual vigor revolved around it. He nodded and pointed at the center of the man's brows. The man's expression immediately became sluggish, and his eyes became lifeless. With a stomp of his foot, he turned into a streak of light and flew in that direction. When he got close to the island, he noticed that the restrictive formation was obstructing him, but it was extremely crude. In his eyes, it was full of flaws. He immediately made a hand seal and turned into a cloud of white smoke. It was like a cloud and mist, and he directly passed through it. On the island, there was an old man in white who was meditating on a rock at this moment. He felt his spirit was triggered, and he exclaimed in surprise before he stood up abruptly and said in a low voice, "Which fellow Taoist has come?" Wei Zihong appeared. He asked, "Are you White Sandwang?" The old man's expression turned solemn. Since Wei Zihong was able to enter his formation so easily, his cultivation base must be much higher than him. The old man cupped his fist and bowed, "Yes, I am. May I know why you have come to my place of cultivation?" Wei Zihong said, "I'm here to look for a person, his name is Hua Xian. Do you know where he is?" White Sandwang said, "Ah, you're here to look for spiritual master Hua Xian. If I'm not mistaken, this person is cultivating on the Scattered Valley Island in the east." Wei Zihong asked again, "I'm new here, so I'm not familiar with this place. Do you have a sea map? White Sandwing smiled bitterly. I'm just a guest elder here, I don't have such a map. But I've been here for a long time, so I know a thing or two about the distribution of the islands. His lips moved, and he transmitted his voice to Wei Zihong, telling him everything he knew. After listening to him, Wei Zihong nodded at him and said, "Thank you for telling me." Then, he turned into a streak of light and flew into the sky. When White Sandwing saw Wei Zihong leaving, he felt relieved and let out a long breath. At this moment, a disciple's voice came from outside the door, "Master, just now, I think I saw a streak of light flying out, but—" White Sandwing scolded, "What streak of light? You must have seen it wrongly. Focus on your cultivation, don't get distracted." The disciple outside the door had no choice but to leave. After Wei Zihong left the island, he checked the direction and flew as fast as he could. In just an hour, he arrived at the outskirts of Scattered Valley Island. He looked at the island from afar and saw that the spiritual vigor on the island was weak, and there was no mountain or river for him to borrow. He concluded that there was no formation on the island, and without any hesitation, he flew forward. When he arrived at the island, he took a look around and found that there were only a few small demons here, and he could not find the Su clan's remnant. He then randomly picked a small demon and cast a soul-stealing technique on it. After some investigation, he found out that Suihua had left for a day and was not on the island. He did not know when he would return. He calculated for a while and found out that the sea area of Frost Maple Island was not small. He did not know what Suihua was going to do, so he had nowhere to look for him. Fortunately, he had found the place where Suihua was staying. If nothing happened, he would definitely return, so he might as well wait for him here. With a flick of his sleeve, the dozens of small demons turned into ashes, and he sat down. However, a moment later, he suddenly felt a surge of spiritual vigor from the south. There were streaks of flying lights flying up, and he could tell that something big was happening. He thought for a while and decided to go check it out, so he turned into a streak of light and flew away. At almost the same time, a golden carriage with a dragon head was traveling to the east. The Lord of Frost Maple Island, Wen Rao, sat in the carriage with a gloomy expression. Just now, there was news that his youngest son had raped a female cultivator when he was playing on the sea. It was not a big deal, but this woman was a disciple of Chan Palace. Xiao Shen, the palace lord of Chan Palace, was furious when he heard about it. He immediately took action and detained her, forcing him to take her back personally. There were hundreds of forces in Fengling Ocean, but Chan Palace, Frost Maple Island, and Five Foals Cliff were the biggest, and they often fought with each other. The sect master of Five Foals Cliff died a few months ago, and Wen Rao was preparing to take over a few of his spiritual islands. For this reason, he personally went to the Chan Palace's flower party to ease the tension between them. Who knew that such a thing would happen after a few days of his return? He was extremely angry, and scolded his son for not accomplishing anything, and at the same time, he hated Chan Palace for not giving him face. He had been cultivating for more than 700 years, and he liked to take in beauties. He had countless children and grandchildren. Usually, if one of them died, he would not even remember the name. But this child was different. His mother happened to be from the Five Steeds Island, so he would be of great use this time. Moreover, as the head of a sect, if he couldn't even protect his own son, where would he put his face? Therefore, when he heard the news, he couldn't care about anything else, and immediately set off for Chan Palace. Halfway there, he suddenly heard a call from behind, "Slow down, sect master." Wen Rao turned around and saw a hunchback Taoist, and said, "So it's Elder Kim, what are you doing here? Is there something in the sect? You can suppress it first, and I'll deal with it when I return." Elder Kim cupped his hands and said, "Please forgive me, Sect Master. I heard that Sect Master is going to Chan Palace, so I made the decision on my own, and summoned all the guests here." Wen Rao was stunned, and said unhappily, "I'm going to apologize, and it's not a battle, why do I have to do this? Is Elder Kim afraid that people don't know that I've embarrassed myself?" Elder Kim's face showed a serious expression, and said, Sect Master, even though I don't have the heart to cultivate, I don't lack beauties, so why would I do such a thing in front of Chan Palace? And it just so happens that I'm Palace Master Zhao's beloved disciple. This is a little strange, Sect Master has to be on guard. Wen Rao heard this, and became vigilant. Even though he didn't think that Chan Palace had a reason to deal with him at this time, but he felt that it was always better to be more careful, so he didn't insist, and called Elder Kim into the carriage, and they traveled together. Not far away, he saw a conveyance light coming from the side and stopping 1,000 feet away. Then, the conveyance light opened, and Suihua walked out. He bowed and said, Island Master Wang, this humble Daoist has come under orders. Elder Kim looked at him, and said, Jinren Hua Xian, you came quickly, and among all the guests, you're the first to arrive. Suihua said, I was picking herbs nearby, and when I heard Sect Master Wang's call, I didn't dare to delay, and rushed over immediately. Wen Rao looked at his respectful look, and was very satisfied, and said, Jinren Su, get in the carriage too, and travel with me. Suihua bowed, and got into the carriage. When Rao looked around, including himself, there were 3 second-stage Yuanian cultivators here, and even if Chan Palace really had any ulterior motives, it was enough to deal with them, so he waved his hand, and continued on his way. 4 hours later, the golden carriage finally arrived outside Chan Palace, and saw that in the sky full of snow, there was a palace that stood tall, and in the sky full of snow, there was a palace that was made of plain jade, and had ice tiles and crystal platforms. Outside the palace, there was a plum forest, and the pink petals were as red as blood. About 100 cultivators stood in front of the palace gate, and the one at the front was a woman wearing a crown, a buyao on her head, and a deep ceremonial robe. Her eyebrows and eyes were like a painting, and she had a jade-like nose and a jade-like mouth, and her cheeks were slightly plump, and she looked gentle and charming. Wen Rao recognized that it was Chan Palace Master Xiao Shen, and wanted to go over to greet her, but Elder Kim came up to stop him, and said in a low voice, If you go any further, you'll be inside Chan Palace's forbidden array, Sect Master can't go any further, let me go up and talk. Although Wen Rao felt that he was making a big fuss over a minor issue, he had no intention of refuting him, and said, So be it. Xiao Shen saw that after the golden carriage with a dragon had arrived, but did not move forward, and couldn't help but frown, and turned back to look at Zhou Zishang who was hiding behind, and said, Fellow Daoist Zhou, all the Yuanian cultivators of my Chan Palace are here, with my power, it's not difficult to kill these 3, but to capture them, I'll have to use some tricks. Zhou Zishang smiled, and said in a low voice, Don't worry, Palace Master Xiao, with Spiritual Master Hua Xian as a spy, it won't be difficult to capture Wen Rao. At this moment, a female cultivator hurried over, and reported, Master, just now, there's a letter, and a few guest deities of Frost Maple Island are coming here. Xiao Shen's expression changed slightly, and she said, Could it be that Wen Rao sensed something? Zhou Zishang lowered his head and thought, and said, It can't be, otherwise, why would Wen Rao take the risk? Palace Master Xiao, you can go up and talk to him first, and see if you can lure him into the array. If not, you have to act quickly, lest something unexpected happens. Chapter 961. After persuading Wang Zhao, Elder Kim descended from the sky and came before the cultivators of Cicada Palace. He bowed deeply and said, Jin Xiao of Frost Maple Island greets Cicada Palace Master. Xiao Shen didn't pay any attention to him. She didn't even look at him. She just stood there quietly. Elder Kim felt awkward and angry, but he couldn't flare up. He could only say again, Jin Xiao of Frost Maple Island is here under the orders of Sect Master Wang. Xiao Shen still turned a deaf ear. At this moment, whispers could be heard from the cultivators behind her. One person said, Sect Master Wang is also a respected elder of a sect. Even if his descendants are at fault, he shouldn't be afraid to come and see Palace Master, right? Someone else said, That's because he feels guilty and doesn't have the face to come, right? Someone else said, What do you mean he's in the wrong? I think he's just too timid. A few more steps and he will be in my Cicada Palace's restrictions. This sect Master Wang is afraid that we will harm him. Once that was said, a few low sneers came from the crowd. When Elder Kim heard that, he said angrily, "Palace Master Xiao, why don't you discipline your own disciples? How can you allow them to spout nonsense here?" Xiaoshan turned around and replied in a cold voice, "If I discipline my own disciples, then who will discipline the disciples of Frost Maple Island?" Elder Kim cupped his fists and said, "Naturally, it will be my sect master who will discipline them. It's not up to outsiders to criticize." Xiaoshan said indifferently, "Where is your sect master? Why haven't I seen him?" Elder Kim couldn't help but choke when he heard that. Wang Zhao's cultivation was profound. Even though he was sitting in the golden carriage, he heard the words clearly and felt embarrassed. He was a sect master after all. If he remained indifferent to being humiliated in front of others, how could he lead the sect in the future? He snorted. He had to ignore everything and go forward. Sui Hua went forward to stop him and said, "Sect master, don't be rash. These people are provoking you with words. It's clearly a trick." Wang Rao pointed in the direction of Chan Palace and said coldly, "Then what are you going to do? Are you going to let these people humiliate me?" However, Sui Hua lowered his voice and said, "Sect master, don't be anxious. I have a plan that can test Chan Palace's intentions." Wang Rao suppressed her anger and said, "Speak." Sui Hua said, "Sect leader can pretend to leave later. If Chan Palace remains indifferent, then I will be thinking too much. If they chase after us, they will definitely harm sect master." Wang Rao gradually calmed down. He also felt that something was wrong. He nodded and turned the dragon-head golden chariot around, pretending to leave. As soon as he moved, Xiaoshan's expression changed. Zhou Zishang also cursed in his heart. When he first saw Sui Hua come forward to stop him, he was already on guard. Now that Wang Rao was about to leave, he was even more cautious. He knew that something had happened, but seeing that the big fish was about to take the bait, how could he allow it to escape from his hands? He immediately transmitted his voice, "Palace Master Xiao. Things have changed, act quickly. I will take care of Wang Rao." When he finished, he turned into a streak of light and charged towards where Wang Rao was. At such a time, Xiaoshan knew that the arrow was knocked on the bowstring and had to be released. She flipped her hand and a light shadow floated out of her sleeves like thousands of flying flowers. He waved his hand at Elder Jean, who was standing nearby. Once she made her move, the 7 nascent soul elders behind her also followed suit. Countless bolts of astral lightning shot toward him. In the beginning, Elder Jean had suspected that the people of Chan Palace had other plans and had come here alone. He was already on his guard. Seeing Xiaoshan move, the jade headband flew up and a circle of spiritual light hung down, preventing the flying flowers from getting close. However, with just this block, he was also pinned down on the spot and couldn't fly away. He lost his last chance to escape. With his strength alone, how could he withstand the combined attack of 7 people? In the blink of an eye, he was drowned by countless lightning bolts and was blasted into pieces. Even his soul couldn't escape. When Wang Rao saw this, he was shocked and furious. If not for Elder Kim going for him just now, he would have been the one dead. He scolded loudly, "Bitch, how dare you kill my people, I will cut you into 1,000 pieces." Sui Hua saw that his words were not at all befitting of a sect leader, so he couldn't help but frown. However, he said, "Sect leader, this enmity can be avenged another day. Right now, it's better to leave quickly." Wang Rao also knew that it wasn't the time to be entangled. He drove the carriage back the way he came. After Xiaoshan and the others killed Elder Jean, they hollered and rose into a streak of light, chasing up into the sky. The Chan Palace elders behind them also followed. However, Wang Rao's dragon-head golden boat was extremely fast. In a short while, the two of them had already escaped hundreds of miles away. The people chasing them were even slightly further apart. If this continued, they wouldn't be able to catch up no matter what. When Zhou Zishang saw this, he regretted in his heart. After he entered Yuanying, he had been thinking of ways to improve his cultivation but neglected his supernatural powers. If he had mastered the heavenly cycle square, he would be able to catch up to the two of them with just one supernatural power. Why would he need to chase so hard? Sui Hua had been paying attention to the surroundings. At this moment, his gaze turned and he pointed, "Sect leader, look." Wen Rao turned and saw 6 rays of light flying over. Not only were there 2 guests, there were also 4 elders. It was enough to turn back and fight the Chan Palace. His courage was instantly boosted. At this moment, Sui Hua revealed a sly smile. Although he had signed the contract with Zhou Zishang previously, he could see that there were many things that could be manipulated. He believed that if Zhou Zishang got the other talisman from Wen Rao, he would definitely turn against him and kill him. If he was facing Zhou Zishang alone, he was confident that he could handle him. However, if this person were to join forces with the Chan Palace, then he wouldn't have the slightest chance. Therefore, he wanted to use the cultivators of Frost Maple Island to fight against the Chan Palace. It would be best if both sides were heavily injured. Only then would it be convenient for him to act. When Xiaoxin saw that the reinforcements from Frost Maple Island had arrived, her heart sank. Originally, she had set up a trap to lure Wen Rao's family into it. However, if they were to chase after them now, it would become a head-on battle between the 2 sections. Even if they could win, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. Then how would they deal with the 5 Foals Island? At this moment, she was also wavering in her heart. Zhou Zishang also cursed inwardly. He knew that if he were to let Wen Rao meet up with the reinforcements now, then there would be no chance at all. He hardened his heart and thought to himself, if I let you guys escape, then I wouldn't be worthy of being a disciple of Yu Xiao. He took out a talisman and activated it with his transcendence energy. Light waves rose and wrapped around him. Like a flying star, he arrived in front of the golden chariot in just a few breaths' time. At the same time, he gave a shout. The high cloud above his head spun and a spiritual pearl seemed to fly up. Then, a ray of light flashed and fell in all directions. In a split second, it enveloped the surrounding 10 miles. When the light flashed, the 3 of them disappeared in the sky at the same time. Xiaoxin couldn't help but be startled. Just now, though she had thought of retreating, now that Wen Rao was nowhere to be seen, her thoughts were stirred up again. The people of Frost Maple Island were like a group of dragons without a leader. It was a good opportunity to get rid of them. She said loudly, "My fellow disciples, follow me to get rid of this person." The cultivators of Chan Palace shouted in unison and followed her to attack. When the people of Frost Maple Island saw that their sect master had disappeared right in front of them, they were also extremely shocked and furious. However, since their sect master hadn't been rescued yet, they couldn't retreat. They could only take out their transcendent artifacts and brace themselves to fight with the cultivators of Chan Palace. Sui Hong only felt his vision blur for a moment before a surging sea of clouds appeared in front of him. He immediately recognized the origin of this art and exclaimed, "Vast cloud of one breath heaven." The clouds in the sky parted and Zhou Zishang walked out. He stood in the sky and said coldly, "Perfected Master Su, as expected, you have other intentions." Sui Hua smiled and said, "Likewise." Wen Rao sensed that the atmosphere wasn't right. He turned his golden chariot and retreated. However, the 2 of them didn't chase after him. To break this vast cloud of one breath heaven, they had to kill the person who cast the art or force him to retreat. Zhou Zishang said solemnly, "Since there are only the 2 of us here, why don't we kill Wen Rao first and then decide who the talisman decree belongs to?" Sui Hua waved his horsetail whisk and said with a smile, "That's what I was thinking." Just as the cultivators of the 2 sects were fighting, Wei Zihong had also arrived 100 miles away. He saw that there were streaks of light and lightning in front of him, so he stopped and sensed for a moment. However, he sensed that there was something wrong in the sky, as if a piece of heaven and earth had been forcibly erased by someone. He opened a slit between his brows and a divine light shot out. After looking for a moment, he couldn't help but frown and said, "Vast cloud of one breath heaven. There's a disciple of the Zhou clan here." To cultivate vast cloud of one breath heaven, one must first cultivate the heavenly universe realm Tongshu. Therefore, the person who cast the art, needless to say, must be from the Dingyang Zhou clan. Wei Zihong looked over but didn't see Suihua's figure. He thought to himself, there's no remnant of the Su clan here. He's most likely trapped in the one breath heaven. After thinking for a while, he decided to wait here and wait for the outcome to be decided before making his move. However, after watching the cultivators of the two sects fight for a while, he shook his head. Even though they were all Yuaniing cultivators, their arcane power and divine arts were far inferior compared to the elders of the Qinsang school, even when compared to the peers of Xianmen. To deal with them, he didn't even need to use a talisman. However, after watching for a while, his expression was filled with astonishment as he thought, why does this Chan Palace's divine arts and Taoist arts look similar to Li Shan sect? Could the two be related? At this moment, the outcome of the battle was about to be decided. Without a leader on Frost Maple Island, it was inevitable that the people's hearts would waver. Shaoshan saw an opportunity and a ray of light flashed by, causing the elder who was fighting against her to spit blood. When Bai Shaoing saw this, he lost his will to fight and escaped. The people of Chan Palace didn't have the intention to chase after him and let him go easily. The other visiting chamberlain saw this and didn't have the heart to stay. He struck out hundreds of bolts of lightning and forced his opponent to retreat. He turned and leaped 1,000 feet away. Then, he covered his sleeves and escaped with a gust of wind. After they left, there were only 4 elders of Frost Maple Island who were struggling to hold on. However, the number of people on Chan Palace's side was almost double of theirs, so it was only a matter of time before they were defeated. Even though the visiting chamberlain broke out of the encirclement, he panicked and ran towards where Wei Zihong was. Suddenly, he saw a cultivator standing in the sky and thought that it was someone from Chan Palace. He didn't think much and subconsciously struck out the talisman in his hand. Wei Zihong looked over coldly. His body didn't move, but a pill floated up from the high cloud. It was as bright as the golden sun and was surrounded by turbid black smoke. When it shone, a thunderous sound was heard. With a crack, the talisman was smashed into pieces. Then, he raised his sleeves and a ball of black smoke flew over and engulfed the person. He rolled a few times inside and the treasured light on the person's body was ground into pieces. After a few breaths, with a miserable cry, the person turned into nothingness.